Once again to our esteemed dignitaries, our respected guests, faculty members, paper presenters, and our dear students. We welcome you once again to the second day of the 5th International Conference on Popular Culture, organized by the Department of English, Sister Nivedita University. Yesterday was a very enlightening and exhilarating day. The various papers presented set the stage for an enriching dialogue by traversing a wide spectrum of themes and mediums. Scholars and researchers explored the evolving landscapes of cultural expression, moving seamlessly from the world of printed books to boundless expanse of digital platforms. Food, too, became a site of cultural imagination, with discussions extending from every cuisines to their fantastic reinventions in anime. The conversations bridged continents and centuries, juxtaposing Shakespeare's enduring relevance with Rabindranath Tagore's modern resonances.
The critical exploration of identities, ranging from shifting paradigms of masculinity to nuanced articulations of the feminine, further deepened the discourse. Folklore and its adaptations into contemporary media also highlighted the dynamic interplay between tradition and innovation, showing how stories continue to evolve in response to new audiences and technologies. Building on this expensive beginning, the second day promises to carry forward the spirit of intellectual curiosity and interdisciplinary exchange. Today's session will continue to interrogate, question, and celebrate popular culture as a site of both continuity and transformation, inviting us to reflect not only on the cultural texts we consume, but also on the ways they shape, challenge, and reimagine our shared human experiences. With that, we begin day 2.
We'll begin day 2 with the third plenary lecture of this conference. The lecture will be delivered by Dr. Priyanka Tripathi, titled Beyond the Surface, Delving into Physical, Epistemological, and Cinematic Dimensions of Gender-Based Violence. The chair for the session will be our own Dr. Priyanka Chakraborty. I think we were having some technical issues at the beginning. Is it solved? Fantastic. So we are ready to begin, right? So before we start the session, my colleague, Mrs. Richa Gupta, will introduce Dr. Priyanka Tripathi.
So Dr. Priyanka Tripathi is an associate professor of English and former head of Department of Humanities and Social Sciences at the Indian Institute of Technology, Patna. She is the co-executive editor of the Journal of International Women's Studies and the associate editor for the Journal of Graphic Novels and Comics and Global South Literary Studies, both published by Taylor and Francis. She was awarded the prestigious Charles Wallace India Trust Visiting Fellowship at the School of History, University of Leeds, and the IPD Visiting Research Fellowship at IASH, University of Edinburgh. She has published in the Journal of Gender Studies, Journal of Graphic Novels and Comics, Geohumanities, and Economic and Political Weekly, amongst others. Her monograph with Bloomsbury is titled The Gendered War, Evaluating Feminist Ethnographic Narratives of the 1971 War of Bangladesh. Her forthcoming monograph, titled Heritage Chronicles India's Spirit of Unity Through Man Ki Baat, is going to be published by National Book Trust India. She works in the areas of medical humanities, and please, we'll begin with the session. Ma'am, Dr. Tripathi, you can please begin.
Hello.
Yes, ma'am, you're audible.
Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. So I actually can't hear you much, very faint voice, I guess. But hopefully I am heard. And I think I must begin by expressing a deep gratitude to Sister. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can,
Am I
ma'am.
audible?
Yes, you are, ma'am.
Okay. First and foremost, I think I'm very, very thankful to Sister Nivedita University Department of English for inviting me, and I have many friends there. And so I think it's a big loss that I am not there in person. Uh, there is an upcoming convocation we have on 6th at IIT Patna, and therefore I had some last minute changes. Otherwise, I would have been very happy to meet all of you there. So I'm going to briefly talk about something that we started researching on a few years back, and which primarily builds on the premise of what we can call legal humanities. And so to say, that probably when we take up these kind of discourses in the contemporary times, there is immense amount of watertight compartmentalizations that has been broken off that we are part of. So I think legal humanities is one such area. I had an annual conference on popular culture, and I saw many my friends speaking, and many of the people who I've read speaking in this conference. So I'm very privileged. I would like to share my screen on that note. Can you please undo the disabled part? I would like somebody to enable my screen, please.
Yes, ma'am, we are doing that.
And Trisha, are you the host? Oh, yeah, sure. What if you can just give me the. Okay, yeah,
Ma'am, it's done. Please check.
yeah, yeah, I can. So, is my slide visible?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am, it's visible.
Hello? So primarily, I thought I will talk about something which has been there in different tropes across Hindi cinema, which is the trope of domestic violence, and how it has kind of or every living being, even and that is why, you know, when we are talking about the entire concept of environmental humanities, all these aspects do have the concept of dignity within it. So on that note, my title the title of my presentation today is Dignity as Justice, Domestic Violence, and Legal Discourses in Hindi Cinema. So when I move to my other slide, I will briefly talk about why I choose that particular title, where dignity becomes the framework through which I analyze Hindi films with particular reference to the theme of domestic violence. I also talk about the emergence of failed marriage plot in Hindi cinema. I move on to the shift in terms of how marriage were projected earlier and what it turned into in the contemporary times, where it had immense amount of influence and effect of globalization, uh, women's right, and how this idea of cruelty became central to the understanding of domestic violence within the changing landscape of projection of domestic violence in Hindi films. And then finally, I bring in the idea of intersections of human rights and honor, transforming narratives of inequality and violence. And finally, I kind of conclude. So, when we take up the idea of dignity as justice, we see that domestic violence and legal discourse in Hindi cinema, there is dignity as women's human rights, domestic violence as violence of dignity, domestic violence in terms of law, domestic violence in films, law and films as cultural discourses. So, there are different shifts on which dignity operates, and we begin of it as human right, which means that every individual who is part of the civilization or the contemporary socio-cultural aspect, I think dignity is not dignity is central to their being. When we take up domestic violence, I think the very idea of domestic violence is seen as the violation of dignity. And there are many discourses that I think I'll talk. Hello. I issue from your side only. I am absolutely there. Yeah. Yeah. So I was on this slide. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. So I am talking about 1990s when hope I'm audible, because once I start sharing the entire screen slides, I don't see myself or I don't see the meeting. So please let me know in case I'm not audible or anything, any issues there. So when we see these particular films, you see that a happy family is still very much part of the discourse of a film when it comes to Indian family system. But 1990s, as you know, is a decade of change, and several political interventions happened. But of all these aspects, economic liberalization was the main thing that you talk about. And why we talk about economic liberalization, because in the 1990s, it not only opened the India not only opened its market for a different kind of intervention in terms of economy, but it also opened its culture for multiple interpretations across the world. And therefore, liberal came with its own sort of anxiety, because it was, I mean, the whole Indian culture was supposedly put out for scrutiny in some sense or the other. Within the scope of this cultural anxiety, we also take up the feminist narratives that are there at that point of time, because when the global rights or global aspects of women rights came into picture, we also started realizing that there was something like a feminist narrative and the anxiety. And why I'm saying this, because till 1990s, it so happened that most of the feminist narratives were operating on the idea of equality. But during the 1990s, it became important that equality, like say for example, women could bear the child, but men can't. So there were many parameters in on which equality as a theoretical framework did less justice to the idea of feminist narrative than the idea of dignity, and hence we did come across this idea of dignity coming into seeping into the Indian feminist narratives as well. When we talk about human rights discourse and the anxiety, this was not pitched as women's right or men's right or any other right, because you see several amount of changes happening in the 2000s, but as a human right discourse, which means that dignity was everybody's right, and therefore because it in some sense brought everybody on the same page, it did bring in the idea of anxiety within the scope of human rights uh, and the legal changes. And therefore, if you see, Domestic Violence Act came out in 2005, but I'm sure you know that whenever some law is there, there is some amount of discussion. So already, say for example, 5-10 years, there must have been debates around that. So when legal changes happen, it is always there is always a precedence of huge amount of debate. So that the anticipation of a legal change happening in the Indian context also led to the anxiety. And the cumulative effect of these anxieties was the cultural anxiety and the failed marriage plot. And once Hindi films started showing this failed marriage plot, they started identifying different set of um, frameworks which could justify this failed marriage plot. So in the 1990s and early 2000s, I take up five examples. There is a film called Agni Sakshi, which is 1996, Raja Ki Aayegi Barat 1997, Mehendi 1998, Daman 2001, and Lajja 2001. So in this all entire narratives, you will find these these particularly three aspects, or maybe four. Four is sort of a conclusion, but that is what happens. So cruelty becomes a psychopathic order in Agni Sakshi and Daman. So in both these films, the husbands are shown as, and it was also assuming, which of course happens in the later on. So in law always thought that it was only women who were suffering. So I am not talking about that aspect here, because I think the later films are, I only talk about 2022. But if you see later films, they are all the more inclusive. I'm still to kind of, do more analysis there. And that's why I refrain from speaking. But then within the scope of the films that I have studied, you can also find it, assumed by the law that it is only women who are kind of suffering within the scope of marriage. And if you see films like Agni Sakshi and Daman, you will find that cruelty becomes a psychopathic order. The husband is cruel because the husband is suffering from some kind of mental disorder. The second is about the moral decadence due to modernity. So in 1990s, when economic liberalization happened, they say that because we opened ourselves to the market, everything became very, we became exposed to what they call it modernity. And if you see films like Raja Ki Aayegi Barat, where they show some kind of Western culture in a very stereotypical way, they say that moral decadence has happened because there is a element of modernity. So it is there in terms of clothes, it's there in terms of food, it is there in terms of many other aspects of a day-to-day lived reality. Then dowry related see, I'm getting a lot of calls. Can I just interrupt from the director's office? Please excuse me, because I'm getting at least many calls here.
Yes, ma'am, sure, please.
I'm extremely sorry. Actually, I was getting a lot of calls from the director's office. As I said, we have this convocation pending, and that's why probably there is so much of disturbance. So I'll quickly try to say what I'm trying to kind of go ahead with. Yeah.
Ma'am, you are audible, ma'am.
Hello.
Yes, ma'am, you are perfectly audible.
Yeah. So I do discuss cruelty from the moral decadence point of view because of the effect of modernity. Then we do discuss in this research paper about dowry related cruelty and family abuse. So you will see that when Indian films, when Hindi films talk about domestic violence, they bring in the idea of cruelty and family abuse. So they pitch on the idea of dowry, which is leading to cruelty and family abuse. Then there is this reinforcing of domestic violence as a private matter and family matter. So there is this entire idea. If you see films like Thappad and all, you will find that. See, I'm facing a lot of disturbance. Somebody's talking constantly. So there is this idea of domestic violence as a private and family matter. So it is not brought within the jurisdictions of law, and that is why you find that it is a private and family matter. It is the family's honor becomes important. So there is no idea of individual dignity, which is part of the theoretical framework when it comes to the projection of domestic violence in Hindi films. Rather, it's about the family honor that is showcased. So when we talk about the psychopathic order in Agni Sakshi and Daman, let us take some examples from how it kind of is reflected. So you will find that mostly after the solemnization of marriage, treated the petitioner with cruelty. So I mean, one of the ways in which you can seek divorce within the aspect of a marriage was this idea of cruelty. And that is why, apart from the mutual consent of divorce, cruelty became the premise of seeking divorce. So they said that the law said that this can be one aspect. And that's why Hindi films also used this trope of cruelty to reflect this husband with whom they can seek divorce or they can get away with. But most of the times, if you see these films like Agni Sakshi, they will find some other partner. They're not looking for divorce. But the man is projected, the husband is projected having some kind of psychopathic disorder, which is a disability of the mind, you can say. An aggrieved person, the wife, means any woman who is or has been in domestic relationship with the respondent and who alleges to have been subjected to any kind of domestic violence by the respondent. So you will find that these laws talk about the element of cruelty, who is the aggrieved party, who is the person who is inflicting kind of cruelty on the person, and any willful conduct which is of such a nature and is likely to drive the woman to commit suicide or to cause grave injury or danger to life, limb, or health, whether it is physical or mental of the woman, or whatever it is, it can be going. So if you see these two films and some of the scenes in which in the scene from Agni Sakshi in 1996, you will see that I mean, Manisha Koirala, who's the protagonist, she's holding an apple and he's shooting. So clearly indicating the idea of, and the family members in Daman, you will see that the family members are also there, but they're all keeping quiet because the husband is projected to have some kind of psychological disorder. So that is the trope Hindi films used. In terms of moral decadence due to modernity, you will see, particularly in Raja Ki Aayegi Barat and Lajja, that
Ma'am, I think that we have lost the connection again. So could you just? We can't hear you, Dr. Tripathi.
Yeah, Priyanka, I can hear.
Yes, ma'am. You are audible again now. Yes.
I think there is some problem, not from my side, surely. Yeah. Okay. So when you see these films, you will find that kind of aspect, and some of these scenes you will see that there is this from Raja Ki Aayegi Barat. You will see that he's holding an alcohol, he's dancing with it, and all kinds of things are shown in these films. Then, of course, we have another aspect of dowry related cruelty. So, cruelty in IPC is also reflected through dowry related amendments. And you will see that 498A came as an important law where harassment of the woman, where such harassment is with a view to coercing her or any person related to her or meet any unlawful demand for any property, these came into being. And then this also had a kind of a modification, because you will see that there is a lot of data which represents dowry deaths, where the death of a woman is caused by any burns or bodily injury or occurs otherwise than under normal circumstances within 7 years of marriage. And 7 year itch, you will see that there are many phrases that talk about that 7 year itch, and probably law took into cognizance this kind of a 7 year period where 498A and 304B of the IPC 1860 became part of. So you see that within the failed marriage plot, dowry related cruelty is also there. So you see this family, they are kind of being cruel to the daughter-in-law of the family. But in all these aspects of failed marriage, there was one thing which was important, that there was no divorce. Another thing which was important is that there was no criminalization, because in all these aspects there was a constant reinforcing that this is my family matter, this is my private matter, and law has nothing to do with this. But after 2005, there was an intersection of human rights and honor, because Domestic Violence Act in itself was an intervention of global human rights discourse, and that is why this intersection happened, and it transformed narratives of equality and violence. So there are three films particularly that I talk about: Thappad, Bulbul, and Vani. So if you see that in Thappad and Bulbul, you will have the idea of inequality and indignity, and at the home space, you will have the culture of honor in Akashvani and Thappad, which in ways redefine honor and emphasize dignity and self-respect, and they take the entire discourse of dignity from orthodoxy to universal logic of human rights. I'll quickly give some examples. So when you talk about inequality and indignity at home space in Thappad and Bulbul, you see that in Thappad, the protagonist says, everyone asked why I wanted to be when I grew up. I don't remember saying what I wanted to be a housewife. And despite being a housewife, it so happens that constantly she's struggling with that only after a slap that has been hit by her husband in a party. So, and she says, I was so busy keeping Vikram happy that I forgot blue was not my favorite color. Then I thought, I may not be the best dancer, but I can become the world's best housewife. I tried very hard, I promise. And similarly, in Bulbul also, there is a diary she writes. Bulbul writes a diary, and Indranil, her husband, wants to see her at some point of time. And when he wants to see this, she says, no, it's my private this diary is my private thing. And he says, what's so personal, what's so private between a husband and a wife? And even for toe rings, you will find that she asked why women wear toe rings, and she says, because there is a nerve there, it's not pressed. If it is not pressed, girls will tend to fly away. It is to control you. So you will find that this idea of inequality and indignity at home space is reflected through films like Thappad and Bulbul post 2005 in a very different way. Similarly, in Akashwani, also you will find the culture of honor, where you will see that the individual dignity is maintained. So she says that I'm not willing to live the life with the consequences of your mistakes. She clearly prioritizes herself over the family's honor. And that is reflective of in both these films, where the protagonists say that no, the idea of my honor supersedes family honor, which was not there before the 2005, where family dignity was most important, and they said no, it's my family matter. So there is a clear cut intersection of that. Similarly, you will find that there is a redefinition of honor, and which emphasizes on dignity and self-respect, where marriage is not marriage can be dissolved, and there is no so much of sentimentalization of marriage, which Harrison calls it, that you do not attach so much of glorious idea towards marriage, while it is, but there is so much of sentimentalization that goes missing, because you treat it as a matter of fact. And therefore you find that domestic violence, whether a slap or sexual coercion, are violation of individual dignity and self-respect of women, and attack on their personal liberty. And therefore the problem is not individual versus individual phenomena, like good husband, bad husband, but rather how society in general has kind of promulgated a discourse in which gender inequality and power imbalance are prevalent. So that is what they kind of highlight. And beyond this discussion of equality of and crime and punishment model, dignity is the lens that can be used as a framework to seek justice in sensitive cases like spousal conflicts, because within the scope of two people operating on such a close-knit way, it's very difficult for law to intervene, and therefore it deliberately leaves those hazy spaces where spousal conflicts can be resolved and brought in these particular nuances. From orthodoxy to universal rights, I spoke about it earlier as well, where you bring in this idea of how economic liberalization opened itself to the universal way of operating. And that's why it was also with women's right that becomes prominent. Also the whole idea of Indian family system, Indian marriages, all those became there. And this is a shift from orthodoxy to universal logic of human rights, where earlier, if you see, there is this element of patriarchy, which is very communal, versus citizenship, which is national. And whereas human rights discourse was universal, it was true for everybody. And we see that this trio is mapped in the reflections of Hindi films post 2005, and especially now post COVID, you will see all the more changes happening within the understanding of how things are shaping up in terms of human rights. So in terms of conclusion, I can only say that there are four aspects that are supposed to be looked into in terms of domestic violence, where domestic violence resulted itself in its form because of the honor hierarchy. There was this whole idea that what is more important? Is the honor of the individual important? Is the honor of the family important? Is the honor of the society important? So these debates became prominent in contemporary times, and it also said that it is domestic violence is pervasive, which is it is not exceptional thing that there are cases of violence. It's an everyday politics affecting daily lives of married women. And here I particularly, like I said, refrain myself from going into broader domains because I have not gone there. I have only analyzed it through the perspective of married women, and that's why I take into discourse that aspect only. And then it's a structural problem. And you will see that domestic violence becomes a structural problem deeply embedded in marriage and family system, because from the very beginning, the idea of how you sort of perceive marriage gets into the idea of bringing in some kind of systemic injustice in the mental makeup of party involved. And of course, when domestic violence does not existed as an anomaly, the projection of Hindi films is such where domestic violence was just exception, and otherwise everything about marriage was perfect, everything about the family system was perfect. So I think that is what I want to speak on, and I am really, really sorry for slightly being on a different mindscape altogether, because there are too many things on my mind right now. Thank you.
No, I was just waiting for it to be unmuted. Am I audible, ma'am?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah, thank you so much, ma'am, for such a well-structured and thought-provoking lecture. I'm sure our students enjoyed the lecture a lot because you spoke on a topic to which they can relate. And also, I think when it comes to laws and domestic violence, these are topics or ideas which they should be aware of. We really apologize, sincerely apologize for the technical glitch that we had and for the various issues that we had to face during the talk, and we are sorry for that. But in spite of everything, you gave such a wonderful lecture, and it would have been really pleasure for us if you could have joined us in an offline mode. But it's okay, we will just do it with the online one. So with that, I'll open the floor for question answers. So if you have a question, please. Oh, sir has a question, yes.
Hello. Good morning, Professor Tripathi. My question to you would be that, so my question to you would be regarding the, I think I'm getting a feedback, so. Anyway, so my question to you would be regarding marital rape. In the sense that that is something, it's such a contentious issue, we know that it happens, but the law refuses to recognize it. My question would be, how would you say Bollywood has dealt with it? Has it dealt with it at all, or even if it has, how do you see the tenor of the treatment of it, of marital rape? So, thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much, sir. I think, see, like I said, in case of domestic violence, also the act came in 2005. And despite the act coming in 2005, there was at least, so to say, 10 years of anxiety and debate around that idea of domestic violence. So imagine in a country where there is definitely a very strong patriarchal system, and within the scope of marriage, everything is permissible. It took so many years to even understand and legitimize the idea of domestic violence. Having said that, Hindi films have, or for that matter, films have, as a cultural text, have a strong role to play in terms of recognizing these social issues. The idea of marital rape also is like that. So if you see many of these films, so I argue within the scope of my research that 2005 was a very important year of Am I audible? Yeah. Yeah. So marriage as an institution could also be problematic. So it was 2005, or I mean, maybe, you can also say that was a very important aspect. But later on, they started looking into more nuances of spousal conflicts in which marital rape is a significant uh, topic of discussion. If you see many of these films, not only in Hindi language, I mostly see films in Hindi and Bangla in India. So I will talk mostly about these two industries. So you will see that films have started reflecting these issues, clearly indicating that there is a need for some kind of shift or redressal or addressing of the marital rape. And I think it's just part of that anxiety and debate that these films are kind of talking about. And surely in due course of time, because it's so intimate, probably there is and there is where this idea of when dignity comes into place, because when we talk about dignity is built as a theoretical concept right now, but and going into the human rights discourse, but it is still not part of the law. So I am sure in due course of time, this is the cultural texts are leading to that kind of debate, and surely we must have some kind of law in no time, and probably in our lifetime for sure. I'm hoping that. But yes, the debates are there. I mean, Hindi films have led to those debates. And other films industries also. I'm particularly taking examples of Hindi films because they are mostly there. And I am sorry, but I can take only one more question because you see, I got a lot of call. I must rush to the meeting.
Unmute. Yes, thank you, ma'am, for your answer. We can see one raised hand in an online question. So if Ms. Surbhi Jha, you can just unmute yourself and ask the question.
I can't hear you.
Am I audible? Hello.
I just can't hear you.
In that case, we will.
That mic, I think that is.
Yes, am I audible from here, ma'am? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Yes, ma'am. So we have one more question from Surbhi Jha, which is an online participant question. So Surbhi, if you can hear me, please unmute yourself and go on with your question.
Can I
Yes,
see
ma'am.
the question? Okay.
Ma'am, am I audible?
Yeah.
Okay, ma'am. So, how do mainstream commercial films differ from independent or art films in the representation of domestic violence, particularly in terms of narrative depth or legal and feminist engagement?
That's precisely what I spoke on, that there are, so if you see even during COVID, when there was a huge amount of rise in terms of domestic, I will not say only violence, but any kind of domestic discomfort as well. Those things were brought in by the short films, the OTT platform, several series were there. So I think there is, with this whole idea of individuals watching everything on their on their phone screen, I think there is immense amount of sensitization built by not only films, but also various other media platforms that are there. Even if you see, for that matter, if you take if you do a sampling of, like, say, 400 Instagram reels, you will find that at least 50 of them are around the idea that there is an idea of self-love, there is an idea of self-respect, there is an idea of dignity, about society, about changing shifts, about breaking stereotypes. And you will see, how, I mean, I don't know, I never saw, if you see how things were earlier, there was never an idea of a woman getting up early morning, sitting in a veranda and having a cup of tea with a book. This was not seen earlier, but thanks to so many social media ways in which society is kind of changing, these things you see, and they are getting very much integrated within how the society respects and values individual spaces and not just the spaces in which family is important and so community is important and society is important. There's huge amount of awareness also from there. So I think not only uh, these whole idea films, so to say, but also short films, social media. There is, if we take it all into the genre of cultural text, we will find that that is there. There is a narrative shift that's happening, and that is why I'm saying that there is. I remember just this morning I was seeing somebody's Instagram post, and one of the comments said that you have changed a lot from 1999 or something like that, as they said, and it was clearly indicating of how that woman had become confident. It was just a kind of a normal post I was seeing, but the very condescending of the shift that had happened. So I think not only films but also social media is playing a lot of role as a part of cultural text. I mean, who would imagine Instagram influencers to be above the age of 60 and sort of rocking? So, I think these are all indicators of the shift that we are having, where individual is prioritized over community, individual is prioritized over family. And the idea of dignity is essential to that shift, is what I argue.
Thank you, ma'am. I hope Shurbi has got her answer. And I know this debate or this discussion can go on, but because of the paucity of time, we will have to conclude the session here. We really hope that for the next event, we will have you offline and you will be coming to our campus. We'll be able to host you. With that, thank you so much, ma'am. And I would really request the moderators to please come in. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you so much.
Yes, I would really request the coordinators to please come in and we can start with the next session.
Thank you, Dr. Tripathi. I hope her lecture will make all of us think and question the way we look at films, cinema. Now, we are going to move on to the next plenary of this day, and which is the fourth plenary lecture of this conference. The lecture will be delivered by Dr. Pradosh Bhattacharjee, titled The Popular as Potential History, Unfolding Gender Narrative of Circus in Late Colonial India. The session will be chaired by our own Dr. Orchita Banerjee, but before Department of Theatre and Performance Studies.
Okay. Thank you for that very generous introduction. Usually, what I wanted to say is, I'm Kolkata chele. A lot of UK was cited there, and therefore I think it is imperative that I also acknowledge two institutions that were my alma mater and kind of formative in the ideas that I'm going to talk about today. Thank you. Just check. So, two institutions which were formative to where I am today, of course, my college, Presidency College, and University of Calcutta. So this is where the ideas grew, and I would like to acknowledge that as well. I come today to speak mostly as someone who has just finished research, officially, unofficially no. And therefore, in my lecture sometimes I have something prepared, but I might digress. I would be mostly speaking about the predicaments of researching popular culture and especially popular entertainment, because I am more interested, I've veered away from literary studies a bit, and I'm more interested in what we call performance studies or theater studies, mostly a discipline which originated in the West, in New York University and University of Chicago. These were the two universities where this discipline came up. And so therefore, researching popular entertainment, and this is fresh in my mind, is full of headaches. Good headaches, but complicated headaches. And sometimes you are scratching and pulling your hair out to think that, eta ki darabe, where the thesis will go. So I speak from this predicament, and I'm hoping that when I speak about this, I'll kind of share a few things. It's almost like the joke, if you want to have a good news, I have a bad news. The good news is you have a series of headaches in this process of research, and you wait for that moment of eureka. The bad news is for the next 30 minutes, I will only talk about the headaches, because I'm not sure about the eureka moment. Okay, so a bit on the title, The Popular as Potential History, Unfolding Gendered Narratives of Circus in Late Colonial India. So I obviously look at historical and historiographical literature around how circus in late colonial India was being studied. And there is not much on this. Over the last 5-6 years, there has been some work, some which is due to get published. Of course, there have been some Indian scholars who have recently worked on it. So it's still a field which is full of possibilities, and a field which is also foggy, because you don't have a lot of reference point in front of you. And so therefore, the idea which kind of I was grappling with, because I'm not a historian, and I'm not trained as a historian. So my understanding was that when we look at contemporary circus, that is circus which happens now, very scant, but it happens still sometimes in winters in India. It is very vibrant in Canada and North America as a form. It has changed. And so there is a lot of theories and ideas and conceptions which have come up around the 2000s, and it has created this discipline called circus studies. Shopkichur pechone ekta studies jure dewa hoy, that's how disciplines are created. So circus studies. I came to know after the end of my first year of research that I am doing circus studies. I thought I was doing performance studies. But thanks to my kind of co-supervisor, who unfortunately is no more, he passed away during the process of thesis, but he kind of acquainted me with the idea of circus studies in the last 20 years. And in trying to look at that, I was trying to look at, and the best way to do this is to look at the help books, self-help books, the readers, the readers which come up, the readers and the companions. And I was trying to do a literature review, and most of this covers literature from circus in North America, Canada, Australia, Europe. Possibly one chapter on Thai circus. So there's a paucity of circus from the global south being researched. And it struck me, so we were discussing this. And the further conundrum was that I am looking at a historical period, the 19th and the early 20th century. Most of these ideas which have come up are from contemporary circus ethnographies. So how do I kind of conjure the two? So that has been one of the prominent headaches. And I thought none better than the idea of a seminar on popular culture or discussions on popular culture, where this set of very serious academic conundrums on what should have been a very entertaining exercise, that is watching a circus. Jara circus dekhte jai, no one gives two hoots about all these ideas. We in the academia do. And therefore, to invoke what has been already invoked by the plenary speakers before, Professor Siddhartha Bishwas, sir, had invoked yesterday, that it's one thing for something to be popular, it's another for that to be canonized and studied in the academia. And I was operating within these conundrums because that affects your methodology. So I'm going to read a bit from here. Can you go to the next slide? Yes. Sinister looking figure. Not the Joker I was looking for. But having said that, the idea is that these are a set of questions that I was kind of bombarded with when you are doing research. Mostly questions during my Viva as well. So I thought, speaking through some of the questions and what the question implies for someone who is researching circus without much precedence is something which I can pass on, attempt to do. So of course, I will not read out all of the questions, but some of them are very crucial, and some of them I briefly discuss in what I'm going to read about. So the last question, why and how may local practices that can exist independently as subjects of study be entangled with critical questions around circus in South Asia? And this question I was grappling with, because when you will hear me speak a little bit, you will see that where are you talking about circus? You're talking about Lati Khela, you're talking about other indigenous forms, but was it on the circus stage? So methodologically, the obsession to trace the circus as a very defined architectural, organizational event, that whatever happens within the circus space is the primary source and the ambit from which one should begin researching circus. It seems quite valid. Except while researching circus in the South Asian context, there is hardly what one would call collections around what was going on in the circus. Thank you. So one way of looking at it is that there is paucity of sources, so how do I go about it? The other way of looking at it is that what we are calling circus in the 19th century is a borrowed kind of architecture, borrowed kind of concept from the West, in the sense we didn't have what we traditionally understand as circus. We had all the repertoires of performance. We had all the kinds of performances. We had Madari traditions, rope walking traditions. We had juggling, not just we, but culturally the whole world had juggling. So these are individual practices which have been there from time immemorial, but something happens in the modern traveling circus form in the 19th century from Europe, and then they travel along certain routes that make them very popular, commercially viable, though thought of as lowly. They don't enjoy the status of what theater does, probably, possibly in the 19th century. Theater is getting nationalized, circus is getting nationalized much later, and circus, even when I was researching circus, there were responses when I was doing interview. They didn't think I was researching circus, they thought I was a journalist. So, apni ki journalist? Then I said, I'm circus research. Research korchen? Circus. That was the exact. Is this a thing to research? And so the point is, circus, mind you, in the 19th and early 20th century, does not enjoy a similar status like theater. So these will be some of the things we keep in mind, and then I'll try to focus into this idea that why what we would call methodologically context. You're giving a lot of context, give me the text. But my point is, the circus itself is a modality through which whatever restricted texts, sometimes these are not texts, embodied narratives which I can get, detritus or debris of performances which you can get in the form of posters, newspaper cutouts, visual sources. They alone cannot create a possible or a potential history of circus. The potential history of circus needs a certain form of creative and historical reimagining, right? And of course, a work which very recently I've not read entirely, but I've been kind of acquainted and really fascinated by, in the terms of how in academic discourse sometimes there are works which go out of their way to break certain methods and discourses. Of course, two works around visual studies being used for historical narration. One is, which is to do with the title, Ariela Azule has a book called Potential History and Unlearning Imperialism. And I mean, if you're interested, that's a great book on understanding how, knowledge discourses are always imperialistic. And so is there a way of writing history without the shackles of those imperial methodological, I mean, the imperial times politically are still there in different contexts, but in academic canons, we tend to think that we are doing it better now, except it still has its ways of coming back. So that book and the other book, which, I mean, I've partially kind of looked into, but been interested through some lectures that I've been hearing, is Saidiya Hartman's Wayward Lives and Beautiful Experiments. Again, in a very different context, but again, how to use pictures with the archival process parallelly, and how to do a kind of creative retelling. So it's not that there is less of any historical method used. I mean, it's not like Pakibaji, source nahi atlamo. No, it's just a reconstruction of how you write and retell history. And mostly these have been, very interestingly, black feminist, black queer writers have had, I mean, there's something which strikes different in the way they have encroached into methodological. So there's something in the embodied experience which really breaks into academic canons, which sometimes the white world will promise by making great seminars, but will not actually practice, right? So I'll start from a personal experience. That is how I started my thesis. So during the period of January 2022, when COVID-19 lockdown rules had been relaxed and life was resuming towards normalcy, I had, as a part of my long-held interest in the performance of circus in contemporary period in India, visited the Ajanta Circus in Kolkata. The path from the ticket counter to the tent was scattered with a few food stalls, and the circus manager, whom I was keen on meeting after the show, had been killing time sipping his tea, speaking to some local member of the Legislative Assembly of West Bengal, who was one of the guests of honors invited to the inaugural show. So I couldn't get my time with the circus manager because VVIP SJ. The show began with a few scattered audience members, really scattered audience members. You don't get much people now. However, the aerial acrobatic act by a woman performer from Manipur, and it was fascinating. If we can move to the next slide. Yes, that's a screen grab. I actually did it during this period. And it features a very strong moment where she's doing a high wire aerial act and she's lifting a male performer. And it immensely brought back joy to me because of having watched this viscerally in the 90s when I was a kid. Tokhon mathay theory chilo na. But the joy, the visceral joy of watching something. And I was trying to tap into what was so joyous. That is the ability of circus to break stereotypical thinking. A woman is lifting a man. Stereotypically, that's an act, oh my God, she's so strong. A man is lifting a woman, oh, that is supposed to happen. So, sometimes the sense in which wonder and amusement is economized by circus are also where they are trying to kind of go into that porous zone of stereotypes. Sometimes you might think they are enforcing stereotypes, sometimes they're breaking. So there is something of the body writing itself like a scribe, telling its story on the stage, which is different from how discourse operates. Discourse, you write, you kind of textualize, alochana, but the body has its own way of discoursing as well. And that struck with me. And so, the current promise of a return to normalcy, so this was around the end of COVID, amidst the period of restricted mobility and stringent corporeal constraints imposed by the state during the pandemic, I clung to the memory of childhood experience of a circus show, which in my mind has always appeared as larger than life, grander and closer to the haptic coordinates of visceral tactility of bodies, distended in space beyond expected routines of movement. Two critical themes emerged from the circus experience. One was affective, rooted in the synchronicity of space, that is the idea of, a very spatial idea of how circus happens. A space turned into a sensory experience within the context of traveling circus. It's a sensorium, which even when stationed in the city during winter months, even circus now, retain the traditional tent structures. And this form of circus is almost vanishing. Now, what you get contemporary circus in the US and North America, and they are mostly what you call social circus or experimentations of circus, sometimes trying to evoke debates. You know, it's not a circus which what you would call popular entertainment in the way we understood. It's a circus which is sometimes didactic as well, which I don't mind because it does new experiments, but it's not what you would call the popular entertainment form. So it mattered to me while doing a history of the Indian circus that even the contemporary circus retains some of the flavors of the old form, albeit that in retaining those flavors of the old form, it also has those dark histories. Circus has a lot of dark histories, right? So this was one of the themes. The other theme which operated within was the diachronic paradigm, temporal, which circus engendered in the embodied sense of nostalgia. So out of nostalgia, I'm thinking 19th century circus niye kaj korbo. It's a form from which it originates. So there's a sense of originary nostalgia. An ambivalent interplay of absence and yearning for its past experiences. Can we go to the next slide? To echo, and I refer to this work, this is not on circus, but again, methodologically, because I've been talking a lot about how you research at the end of the day has to be written. Fortunately or unfortunately, that's, you research, you speak about it, but the productive aspect of it in the market is, boi beriyeche ki? Have you published this? So it has to be written. But I am writing about an experience which is very embodied as well. So sometimes maybe the written form is not adequate, but I have to do it. So I found in this book a very, again, interesting methodological way in which nostalgia as a principle was being historicized. And almost historicized with a futurity in mind, in the Russian context. And that helped me methodologically as well. So I'm going to quote a bit. Algia, longing is what we share. The word nostalgia has been broken down. Yet nostos, the return home, is what divides us. Although the notion of return is first understood as temporal, a journey back in time, on reflection it reveals itself as a spatial experience, one that is unevenly shaped by the coordinates of time. To borrow a circus reference, researching popular entertainment often makes one walk a tightrope, balancing what constitutes the popular in public discourse with invoking the popular in academic canons of knowledge formation. So one is popular out there, which in its own agency can speak of itself, doesn't need us. The other is funding roots, which you need. Academia thinks now is the turn to turn towards decoloniality. Now is the turn to turn towards popular. So that kind of discoursing. In addition, researching circus performance and its allied physical culture also gives rise to the challenging idiom of writing performance cultures, whose modes of being present in history is mostly along routes of embodied knowledge, that the written and textual forms of preservation may only partially encapsulate. So my own interest in circus research lie in situating it within the broader spectrum of comprehending the popular in the knots and slippages with the historical. That is, how may researching circus in late colonial India situate itself within the historiographical trajectories of the popular as seen from the second quarter of 20th century. I am researching it from my positionality. I am here within a certain privilege of caste, class, gender, and then I am accessing, so there's terms of access, and I'm in the 21st century, right? I'm on the second decades of 21st century. So how archival logics have changed, that needs to be acknowledged. And in trying to navigate this set of methodological challenges, also read as headaches, I find the idea that Stuart Hall proposed important. And what is that idea? Of popular culture being a site of contestation of the dominant hegemonic culture with that of the culture of the people, the common folk, that many a times have instantiated resistance, revolutions, and transformations of order from below. There is a lot of talk around this. If you're interested, obviously, Gayatri Spivak's work, Can the Subaltern Speak, which revolutionized, but there was after 1983, I mean, 20 years from there, there is a lecture by her, I think in Colombia, you can check it online on YouTube, The Trajectory of Subaltern in My Work, where she's trying to clarify, because within these 20 years, there's a lot been written. And this idea is that within Global South, what kind of idea of popular are we interested in? One popular is the idea of circulation. That is the market logic, which something is very popular. The other idea, linked to this idea very tacitly, is a certain revolutionary kind of subaltern potential that the popular holds. And that kind of brings me to the kind of Indian etymologies that sometimes we use for the word culture in the Indian context. Sanskriti and Krishti, right? These two words we use. Sanskriti is an idea which is about reforming, so reformative idea of culture, to reform something. Sanskaran, sanskar. And Krishti, the idea is associated with a certain agrarian, rural form of culture, right? So the idea of, and the idea of Krishti and Sanskriti, you know, when we use the word loko Sanskriti, mostly, Jano Sanskriti. So the way, the long period of Indian history, which has become agrarian over time. Of course, we are not entirely agrarian. There has been a history of tribal, forest-dwelling population as well. So ecologically, we are very interesting. And demographically, we are very interesting. And that's where a lot of recuperative, revivalist understanding of tribal histories is trying to drive home this point that you are telling history, Adibashider history, you are saying, but you're telling history from a much more mobilized. For that history to be spoken, you have to get into the forms of daily existence that those people were existing in or are existing now. So what I'm trying to get at is you can use the word popular culture and the debates that Stuart Hall and the Birmingham School started, but somewhere it's much more complex when it comes into the Indian context, right? Because this dichotomy of Sanskriti and Krishti is dialectical. It's a debate. And sometimes, over a period of gentrification, what happens is the popular and the lowly is cited by the elite in a certain way. It's invoked. I'm not talking about what it is out there. I'm talking the manner in which it is invoked. You will see it in songs, you will see it in popular culture, you know, how these kind of metaphors of the popular and the public. And these kind of invocations have two very interesting temporal periods. And I'm trying to foreground this into my circus research. One is the colonial, the other is the post-colonial moment. Both during the colonial moment, suddenly people started remembering the margins. And during nationalist period, what started happening was, let's go back to our roots, let's go back to the popular. Let's go back to, you know, cultures associated with the agrarian economy, with the forest-dwelling people. And let's harness them to create this unified nationalist discourse. Of course, unified from a very upper-class caste sensibility. And the other moment, I would say, a little presumptuously sometimes, a more dangerous moment is the post-colonial moment. And rather the decolonial moment, as it is happening in India right now. Because now it's a very fudged history. The right wing is doing decoloniality. And they are saying that, you know, what we are doing is decolonial, because we are going back to our culture, right? Except the terms are borrowed from decolonial discourse. But the point is, it is a very statist history being written. So it's a very dangerous predicament, you know. And why this debate is important? Because I am, in my research, interested with indigenous practices as it existed when these imperial forms came in. They brought their culture. So they brought circus with them. But we were not devoid of physical cultures. And when I say we, it's not a homogeneous idea, but I'm saying it against the West. We were already complex with our forms of indigenous cultures. And indigeneity becomes more complex when you are in the realm of embodiment. Because when you say Lati Khela, you will think that I'm talking of feudal, you know, the Latials, feudal Bengali. But then Lati Khela is, as a repertoire, as a form of training, has influences from Kalaripait. But it equally has influences from Jujutsu. So this originary idea that a form as it exists now must have a certain originary point. And if it is an Indian point, the right wing will say, "Ito, we started, it all started here. Yahi banega." This is where it started. So the point is, I am trying to go against that originary idea of indigeneity, that indigeneity is to trace, which is a very important idea, the first nation, the first people, but it is not to disenfranchise them as members of the land and to take their discourse as supporting my idea of indigeneity. It's rather to stay attendant that indigeneity will also kind of modernize itself. In the sense, modernity also has a way in which it is accessed, made alternate by local and indigenous populations. This is where the idea of alternate modernities come in. So while I was doing a sort of recovery, recuperation from my position, this debate became very central, an idea for me that what is this relationship and this slippage between what we call existing indigenous practices with circus, which is also physical and embodied. And sometimes these are porous, because you don't have Lathi Khela technically on circus stage. There is no implication of that, because the British have created rules. They have made the Criminal Tribes Act and other acts which are censoring everything that is indigenous as harmful, brutal. And then they're putting acts, and I don't have the picture here, but the popular act was that of Zazel, who was a woman performer, being shot from a cannon. And because it's a very choreographed act, you are saying, well, this is choreographed, this is not brutal, except there is imagistically, it is everything brutal. A woman being shot from a cannon. It's war economy, gender, everything is very wrong. But that is a sanctioned act because it is happening in the period of modernity where circus is now the imperial person's culture, because it's the culture of military control, right? And on the other end, hook swinging, chorok and gajon, if you see, you know, the kata jhab and hook swinging, they are also, or even the lathials, there is a tremendous amount of skill involved in those kind of acts. I would say skill, not just the idea of religious perseverance, but skill as well, to be able to do that. But no one talks about that in the way one talks about circus skills. So when the slippages started happening in the historical discourses that I was looking at, that led to my theory, that led to my methodology. I didn't start with a methodology. What Pinakida was also yesterday saying, that let your text guide you to where you reach, right? So in that context, can we move to the next slide? Right. So circus companies like Chiarini Circus, Cook Circus, Humston, and Barnum and Bailey's, all the posters are not here, were some of the important circus companies that traveled across India, performing a range of embodied physical feats with humans, objects, non-human animals, that amalgamated individual traditions that has a long history into the commercial form of the circus under the big top. So we must remember this was a defining moment historically of these circus companies, none of which were indigenously kind of born. These were already established circus companies, mostly in North America. Cook was a British circus company, and obviously we have heard of Barnum and Bailey and Ringling Brothers, you know, coming. And so I am interested in majorly in colonial India, but also colonial Bengal. So today when I use examples of the indigenous examples, I'm mostly talking of colonial Bengal. The circus which first started coming from colonial Bengal were the two circus companies. One was Nabagopal Mitro's National Circus, and the other was Priyonath Bose's The Great Bengal Circus. These were the two circuses which started coming up in the late 19th century, 1880s, right? And the circus proprietors were all Hindu propertied gentlemen. Monomohan Bosu and his son is Priyonath Bosu, so the urban gentleman. And there was a kind of angst and anxiety in the Bengali class saying, circus, you know, you're getting into circus, you should become an IAS, or you should get into, you know, this is not for you. And along that time, these circuses were traveling. So people with a sustained interest, when I say people, these are Bengali middle class gentlemen, they had an interest in physical culture, and they started visiting these circuses, talking to the proprietors, trying to get into how circus works as an industry, and kind of, let's say, borrowed the architectural economy of circus. And this is where, as a researcher, the problem lies, where questions are that after all, circus is a Western form, so it's a borrowed form. So are you researching circus as that borrowed form within the cultural context of India? I'm saying that it's a little more complicated. I'm trying to say that when that borrowed form comes to India, it also transforms. It has its way of interacting with the indigenous. So even modernity and elements of modernity, which is part of Sangskriti, dominant discourse, has a way of not only appropriating, but getting changed by Krishti, which is the discourse from below. That was the idea. So a question which comes is, how may we conceive of Indian circus as popular entertainment, and how may one research the popular in an embodied context from the limited nature of what one may call legitimate primary sources and archival findings? One of the central aspects of the relationalities that popular entertainment may forge with archives is to consider the dimensional slips between how performance archives are held with the dynamic, visceral, embodied nature of performance forms. So for all these materials that I was trying to find in Bengal, held materials, where do I find it? British Library, British Museum, the other great place where you find everything about us, the great shop. And I'm finding it in Victoria and Albert. Look at these three institutions, and they are all institutions rooted in an imperial history. I mean, Pinakida spoke of Louvre and what Louvre is deconstructing, but before deconstructing, they constructed on the loot of others a lot, which is mostly the V&A. And if you know the institution of V&A, Victoria and Albert, it is built on the Great Exhibition of 1851. And Great Exhibition of 1851 is absolutely horrendous in modern context because it was like the most exotic show on earth. Queen Victoria will say, I will give you as much money, bring every exotic elements, and we will, on South Kensington, where the library is, we will create this huge building where we will house it. And so we will be the imperium, you know, the space where everybody comes to see the world. It was not enough that they went across the world. Everybody now needs to come back to see the world that they hold. And I was one of them doing research. I have to go through their archives, through how things are held. One of the good things of that is they are organizationally better, in the sense they hold things and there is a little less gatekeeping than how, you know, sometimes South Asian organizations hold resources. But having said that, it's interesting to understand that the sources that I'm looking at about Indian circus, scantily, even when they are found officially within the collections, the museums and archives of the British Library, British Museum. So I am already researching something at the beck and call of a discourse which was imperial, right? So can we turn to the next slide? Right. To just give you an idea, one of the first origins of circus, modern circus jeta bola hoy, it began with this gentleman called Sir Philip Ashley. And it did not begin as the circus as we know now, right? It began as a circus which was known as an equestrian circus, an equestrian act. What's an equestrian act? You know the idea? So it's like putting hippodramas, horse riding dramas. And I stumbled in the British Library, great place to stumble across this, storming and capture of Delhi. This is in 1857. The date is very interesting. We had the revolt of 1857. And of course, they huddled up and they said, Charles Grant, you do something. You make the things evangelical, enough of being Oriental. Now we will do it our way, broadly speaking. That was how it was happening. And Charles Grant's commission was created in 1858, right? And in 1857, in London, in Lambeth, they have put up advertisements saying storming and capture of Delhi. And that's going to be a horse riding act. And in that horse riding act, they will show that there are these very wild horses where people are riding. And there is one horse where the gentleman who is militarily dressed will come with poise and, you know, that will be the best horse act towards the end, trying to show that this is how it's done. And this is how we capture and storm Delhi. This is how we civilize the mission. So you see, something as naive as a horse riding act is politically motivated, imperially motivated, and has a certain meaning making which is very imperial. And this becomes the standard. Sir Philip Ashley's horse riding acts become the standard. Even the ring, the 42-inch ring, the circus ring that we find, that standardization happened from here. Obviously, this was in the amphitheater. Later, the tent form came in through. So it's important to remember that when you go to research circus, even materials that are held about what we call Indian circus is color-coded with a certain colonial imperial. So you have to remove the hay, you know? And that can only happen if you kind of decolonize the methods in which you question, right, sometimes. So it doesn't have to be, you know, is this a primary source? How much of less of a primary source have you? And if you have so much of less primary source, what are your research based on? But your research is based on popular oral cultures, embodied cultures, people's stories. Most of it has not been kind of archived. Some of it might have been done locally. Go to the local libraries. So Chandannagar Library, the Kakurgachi Library, the Bagbazar Library, these are small holdings, the Uttarpara Library. So these are small holdings which have very local kind of context and informations, and then you do ethnography, you go and talk to people. So yeah, can we move to the next slide? I mean, I've not been very fond of reading history from the college days in the sense the way I perceived it. But something revolutionized when, and I've not read him exhaustively as well, but when I started reading a bit of Ranajit Guha, and I think this quote is kind of emblematic of what we need to do within methodological struggles. So this is a historical context, but I'm saying what he says about rehistoricizing and revisiting history applies to other disciplines as well. We can do that. And so what does he say? Elite historiography of the colonialist or neo-colonialist type counts British writers and institutions among its principal protagonists, but has its imitators in India and other countries too. Elitist historiography of the nationalist or neo-nationalist type is primarily an Indian practice, but not without imitators in the rank of liberal historians in Britain and elsewhere. Both these varieties of elitism share the prejudice that the making of the Indian nation and the development of the consciousness, which is nationalism, which informed this process, were exclusively or predominantly elite achievements. In the colonialist and neo-colonialist historiographies, these achievements are credited to British colonial rulers, administrators, policies, institutions, and culture. In the nationalist and neo-nationalist writings, to elite Indian elite personalities, institutions, activities, and ideas. What clearly is left out of this unhistorical historiography is the politics of the people, and I've kind of highlighted that part. And I think if we move along, and so I'm going to just speak through the slides, keeping this idea in mind. So it's a period marked by intense negotiations and adjustments within the elite colonial nationalist sphere. I'm using the colonial nationalist in a hyphenated term, because the colonial and the nationalist have their own ways of hegemonizing, right? So normally we tend to think that the anti-colonial nationalism is our base. We speak from an anti-colonial nationalist because we are speaking against the colonial discourse. But even the anti-colonial nationalist discourse was hegemonic. That is, it was creating hierarchies. It was excluding and including certain forms of culture and excluding others. So in that kind of negotiation, the embodiment of culture and the transformation of embodied practices and performance forms, which could not be appropriated without altering their ethos and communities associated with them, becomes important. So can we move to the next slide? So here is 2 case studies that I'll briefly scan through as examples of what I tried to set up kind of conceptually. How do I go about doing this? Of course, I can't give you all the case studies, but 2 case studies. And I use 2 aspects, that is the idea of masculinity in circus and allied physical culture in the 19th and early 20th century Bengal, but also colonial India, and what we call effeminacy, effeteness, or the idea of moral degeneracy associated with a gendered construction, effeminacy. So these 2 ideas kind of constantly, if you look at the archives, newspaper archives, different kinds of journals, writings on physical culture, you will come across words which kind of point to that. An interesting account I kind of got hold of from Priyonath Bose's recollections, which is a diary when he was traveling. So it is part, you can find this in Professor Bose's Apurbo Bhroman Brittanto. There is a book within which this story is recounted. And I find reading this story kind of deconstructively very important. What is that? So they have gone to this is the circus travelers. So they have gone to a place called Pithapur. They have been doing circus. And they are now resting. They are lodging somewhere together. So we all started to look at each other in panic. This is night. Amongst the commotion, powerless to move, we tried to shout for help but could not do it. The next moment, we saw the shimmer of 5 to 7 terrible human forms dancing about us. It made our teeth clatter with terror, and we eventually fell unconscious. When we regained consciousness, I found myself lying on a bed, and some people gathered around me. A little further, the caretaker of the Rajbari of Pithapur wore a concerned look on his face. He recounted to me the events that had unfolded and how people nearby, having heard the screams from the Rajbari of Pithapur, had rushed here and found us all unconscious. It is through their earnest support and care that we all were restored. Even till date, any reference to this incident makes us palpitate and skip a beat. Now, mind you, I seek to read in this anecdote the markings of a choreo-policing that was characteristic of body cultures in colonial frames. As bodies organized and ordered in the principles of colonial masculinity were propped to forbear muscular prowess and strength as an antidote to moral degeneracy and effeteness, the fictional currency of a collective haunting, losing control of one's body through unconsciousness, and the tacit collective embarrassment realized in the form of a humor seeks to sanitize the affective leakage of fear through the emotive semantics of tale, unbecoming and funny of a group of manly performers who valorizes adventure and risk through their choreographed showmanship. মানে এক কথায় হাওয়া টাইট হয়ে গেছে ভূত দেখে কারা পালোয়ান তারা they are all bodybuilders. They're supposed to be full of muscularity and strength. And so you see, this is not on the stage. This doesn't happen on the circus stage, because the circus stage is about representing a certain form of, colonial masculinity kind of being imitated. But, these kind of stories, if they are to be historically believed, because we don't know the viability of this story. This is a story at the end of the day. Someone is recounting it. It could be gossip, it could be rumor. But that is how South Asian history of performance and oral cultures operate. It operates through stories which have what Spivak would say, a logic from below, right? So can we move to the next slide? The primary figure that contributed to the gendered and racialized scorn meted out to the masculine body was that of the Bengali Babu, who was identified as the equivalent of the degenerative, decadent, and morally scrupulous men that figured within the Victorian anxieties with nationhood and its ideal of efficient subjects. Pitted against the civilized manly Englishman was the effeminate Bengali whose customs and body cultures were wild and obscene, in want of training, and thus closer to the assumed Scottish slang hunk, which initially meant, and this was very interesting to find, being womanly and indolent given to morally unscrupulous activities. So hunk actually meant this in the Scottish dictionary. Thus the most viable form of emancipation seemed to be to repossess dignity through physical culture that would cultivate the body and mind to be fit and healthy. So you see the problematics. In trying to negotiate this idea of gender, it's like the idea of Macbeth and Lady Macbeth. For Macbeth to be completely the heroic figure, milk of Concord has to be broken. That aspect of mothering, that aspect of gender, which is very stereotyped. So there is a sense in which there is a control which is sought on the body of the female, the woman, and then it has been turned into a discourse, right? So this is from the Kalighat pot paintings as an example. Can we move to the next slide? How much time do I have? 5 minutes? Okay, I'll try to take 5 more minutes. Briefly, I'll scan through this because there's a lot here. What I'm trying to suggest is Sando became a very important figure, because what Sando brought when he came to India was he was posing. Then there was this whole set of sketches of Sando, pictorial sketches of Sando's nudes, and he would pose because it's a matter of showing each sinews of the body. So it's like live art. And this form of gazing was something which I mean, live apart the Indian genteel society is not acquainted with. This is not happening in India. This is happening in London. This is happening in other places. But Sando is coming to India. And Sando comes to India and meets all these, the wrestlers and the akras and the bodybuilders. And these wrestlers in the akras and the bodybuilders are also recruited by the circus company. So they are very much in circus, right? So what I'm trying to say is, if you look at the construction again, Hindu kind of dominated idea of construction is on the one hand, hunkness, that is possessing a certain form of masculinity. In the Indian context, the hunk needs to be a hunk by kind of desexualizing, in the 19th century, desexualizing the sexual economy of the body. It cannot pose like this, but it needs to be, the idea is that it needs to abstinate, the sense of abstinence from sexual discourse. So there is a lot of yogic, tantric, and different kinds of practices where there is a lot of discourses around this, that the Palawan needs, or the strong bodybuilder needs to harness strength by using retentive practice. That is retentive fluid practices. You do not divest yourself into sexual pleasures. And I have found this in Kalaripayat and other forms, that sexual activity around the period when you are supposed to indulge, you need to stop. So there is an economy of this kind of preservation, and I found that very interesting as a counterpoint to Sando, who had queers, I mean, he was a queer person, and the sensibilities that Sando kind of broke. And so coming of Sando to a more orthodox middle-class Hindu context became somewhat very interesting, because it also broke open a sense of mobility for the circus performers. They thought, if Sando can do it, at least we will not pose for the nudes, but you will find half-nude pictures of yoga gurus, like Vishnu Ghosh and all, they're doing these postures. And Sando becomes pictorial, very important. Can we move to the next, very quickly? Yeah, we can move again. Next slide. Can we move again? Because I've gone through. Yeah, we can keep moving. I want to come to, yes. So, something happens during the nationalist period around Lati Khela. And I'm interested with this idea because, again, we have a figure called Professor Murtaza, who trained a lot of circus performers. So, two questions, prospective question, that why are you talking about Lati Khela? Because there is a distribution of that discourse into the circus economy. The akras are saying that we are going to harness a lot of physical strength, but they're also trying to create anti-colonial, resistive, muscular discourse, albeit it's a male-dominated discourse. And Lati Khela is being, for the first time, inscribed. It's a physical form. You orally train yourselves. But Pulin Bihari is doing a very meticulous sketching. So Pulin Bihari's documentation around the 20th century, when Anushilon Samiti is getting banned, seems a very important period of looking at history. So if I look at Anushilon Samiti kind of discourses, and then I look at, through that broader history into Lati Khela, it embeds that idea of masculinity with a very political potential. Can we move to the next? Yeah, we can move. Again. Yes, this figure interested me because to the suggestion that I tried to put that, within the Indian subcontinent context, the Bibhajan, or the gap between what we call masculinity and femininity is very stark in the 19th century. And so you are talking of the woman circus performer mostly through the lens of the public woman, the figure of the public woman. And then I was kind of pushed into thinking that there have been in the West experimentations with posturing and, because this is a stage name of Valerie Lavie, a performer from New York. And she's particularly known to use burlesque. Burlesque is a form where you use a lot of nudity, stripping, queering, and creating very muscular postures. So a woman who is also muscular, imitating the muscular postures, at the same time doing acts to kind of titillate very heteronormative desires. So playing around with the body. And I was asked that, if that has happened in the West, that kind of transaction, what would you think of the women performers in India? Have they kind of broken that code? And my response was, for that code to be broken, she would work in the burlesque and the vaudevilles, and such kind of theaters never existed because we did not have that kind of erotic topography. Our topography was very censored, first through the colonial machinery, second through the nationalist Hindu machinery, where it was very censored. So which brings me to the next slide, very quickly. I'm going to read a bit of this because this is a work of fiction around a figure I'm very interested in. The figure of Sushila Sundari, right? So Sushila Sundari is a figure from 19th century and early 20th Bengal, a great performer of acrobatic acts and lion taming. And she's remembered as a figure who perishes because a lion bites one side of her face in one of the acts. But Shirsho Bandyopadhyay reconstructs this history because it was kind of known within the gossip and the kind of that economy of gossip and rumor that there was a love triangle between Sushila, Priyonath, and Ganapati. And this, there is no archival verification of. I do not expect archival verification from a gentlemanly society. I mean, gentlemanly standards, they will never spill this. And I have interviewed members of the family and I was given this response that even in 19th century, Ami holo tai kortam. She is a mistress of Priyonath. Why would I marry her and bring her into the unit of a family, which becomes very interesting in the 19th century for a nationalist reconstruction? A figure of a circus woman performer as a public woman is not important in a nationalist reconstruction. And I was almost shocked because the figure of Binodini Dashi became, she is very interesting. Because Binodini is gentrified onto the stage by Girish. But similar gentrification doesn't happen with Sushila. And that became a point of inquiry in my essay. So, can we go to the next? Again, next. Yes, I will finish with this and then conclude. So, while researching, when again this question props up, that what were these kinds of primary sources that you're looking at? I found this one, and at the best there is another image, which is there in the CSSC archives, and you will find that of Sushila in the cage with a tiger. Now, what was this act? This is a very popular form of act. Even in the West, this was done. Is that there is a tiger in the cage, the woman, and the sartorial sense, the way the woman is dressed, in the 19th century context is important. So I would ask you to visually look at it. And she comes playfully, strokes and caresses the tiger, leans on the tiger, takes her face into the tiger's opened mouth, as if like, trying to survey that space. Mathatake, almost taking this head into the mouth, and then comes and lies on the tiger. I found this very interesting, and I thought methodologically the answer to how I read this is not there in gendered discourses. There's no hardly gendered discourse around circus performers. But I found a very interesting path in animal studies. And I'm going to briefly talk about that and conclude. To say that, how you kind of look at vicarious paths. So in new non-human animal studies, the tiger in the 19th century is a very interesting figure. The tiger is looked upon as a scourge. The lion is looked upon as imperial strength. So there is a figure, I have not used it here, of a lion kind of coming and pouncing on the tiger and trying to school it. And the tiger is looking towards a naked British white woman who is on the floor. There's a picture. Unfortunately, I don't have it with me. If I had it, I could have shown you. But imagine it this way. And this was visually constructed within the imperial British imagination as the lion, which is the British civilizing mission, saving the naked white woman who is within the British context the most subaltern figure. Because the indigenous scourge the tiger represents, the indigenous vile masculinities that the space of subcontinent India represents, is attacking this woman. And you will find in a lot of Mem Sahib's diaries, if you look at Mem Sahib's diaries, they hate two people. They are hating the white man who is not earning enough, and they hate the brown men. And it's there in their writings. And I find that interesting, that it had to be a tiger. That a scourge, colonially what is thought of as a scourge, and Sushila is put in conjunction with the tiger, and Sushila is having a very great time with the tiger. There's a camaraderie, except she gets bitten off on the day the tiger is underfed, because there is a famine. And if you look at the history of famine in India, much of these were not natural disasters. These were created because of certain economic decisions that were done by the British. So it's a moment of subalternizing. If I am jumping a lot of things and saying that, it's a moment of subalternizing of the figure of Sushila. So she may be scant in the archive, but within animal studies discourse, there's a lot that that picture can unpack. And so if you're really getting into the popular imagination, one has to get into popular forms of beliefs and logics, which is either there as oral forms, sometimes written about by the colonial discourse. So you have to kind of spread out for something that is too scant in the actual archive to be able to talk about what usually goes on as context and try to bring that context as saying, no, these are not contexts, these are equally my texts, my primary sources. So a lot of discourses that I was looking at on the figure of the hunter, the figure of the tiger, the symbolism of the tiger with that of the lion became very important for me. And it is a lot of digression, but for reading one picture, I had to get into all of that. And I thought that, I would like to think that's my eureka moment of creating the South Asian idea of how you create a historiography of the popular that is very scant in the archive, right? Can we conclude? Can we just move to the last slide, very last slide? Yeah, can I go before this? Yes. A very favorite picture of mine, Palawan, Shoshti Charan. In my final chapter of the thesis, I kind of go ahead and I use this form of caricatures and illustrations by artists, indigenous artists. I use Shukumar Rai, I use Upendra Kishore. And I'm trying to say, I found something in it, it's not accidental, that many of these caricatures are about contortions, circus-like acts. I'm not trying to say that this is influenced from circus. There is no archival finding to verify this. But can I read back through the Palawan or Shoshti Charan, the idea that in potential history, and that is my next quote. Can I go to the next slide? So I'm reading that image into this idea. A simply true account of the world based on what the documentary record permits one to talk about, what happened in it at particular times and places, can provide knowledge of only a very small portion of what reality consists of. However, the rest of the real, after we have said what we can assert to be true about it, would not be everything and anything we could imagine about it. The real would consist of everything that can be truthfully said about its actuality, plus everything that can be truthfully said about what it could possibly be. And I think that engagement significantly within a South Asian context opens up the idea, in my context in gendered discourse, to rethink the archives through the popular. So that would be where I want to end. Thank you.
Hello? Am I audible? Hello? Thank you, Dr. Bhattacharya, for sharing your intense deliberations on something that we have always considered popular, but nowadays it's rarely acknowledged among the masses. And thank you for bringing it back to the minds of the people. I'm sure our scholars and students have enjoyed it very much. And since we are running out of time, so we would quickly have a question-answer session, maybe 2 or 3 questions we can take from the audience. If you have any, yes, please.
Hello, I am Millie from UG1 first semester. First of all, thank you, Dr. Bhattacharya, for such an interesting lecture. As a research scholar on circus, Did you ever feel yourself isolated while doing the research because it's such an untouched topic? As well as, do you think that there is any possibility of reintroducing circus among the masses in current modern date? Thank you.
Thank you for that question. I mean, this could take a while, but I'll try to, because that question is very central. The second part of your question is something that I'm thinking right now. Did I feel isolated? I did feel isolated in the white world. But that's because if you did any other research, you will feel isolated. Unless you do decoloniality, then they will make you a part of a big group. Because decoloniality sells in the white world. I felt isolated very much, and I'm going to speak on this because that's where I acknowledged my own roots as well, is when I'm making some observations here, I have nodding heads within the audience, because some contexts we understand. It doesn't mean that you have to read all this, but when I'm talking about the tiger being a scourge, I could see some few nodding faces and all that. And so, you see, there is what we call a cultural transaction and negotiation, because research, you are writing. And you are not stapling yourself on the page through your citations to say, this is exactly what I meant, don't take it otherwise. Because, the author is dead. I have written something, people can interpret. But the point is, I have a commitment as a researcher and an ethics, especially as a South Asian researcher, and a privileged South Asian researcher, mind you. Because in the West, the idea is that if you are South Asian, they'll think you are the lizard on the wall. So they'll, oh, you are South Asian, please talk about Girish Karnad's play. I'm not an expert on Karnad. Oh, but you're South Asian. They want to hear your side of the story. And this was exactly what I was told. Except there are many sides of the story to what we call South Asian. I am a privileged side of the story. There is a Dalit consciousness and a Dalit kind of feminist consciousness, which I'm interested in, but I'm not an expert of as a South, and I don't represent that. So the isolation sometimes is thrown upon you. You are made isolated through these kind of queries and questions. And I say this isolation more metaphorically. And the other is sometimes they don't get you. And it is a feeling I have. And sometimes people here are getting me. That basic cultural difference is still there. And that's where I suggested that more of these kind of stories and anecdotes of methodological struggles, or what you call the struggle of a researcher, because in the West you have a very interesting thing called researchers share. They come on Thursdays, they share their experience. Everyone is happy that day. No one is, they talk about struggles, but they're happy. So it's a very white codification of, oh, we are all happy today, we have come here. But the point is sometimes there needs to be anger. Sometimes then I was isolated sometimes with angry moments. But I've learned that you can't be very angry in the white world. If you're too angry, they get flustered. It's like, bhalo kore bolo. It's a concept which you're telling, you're critical, but don't bring, so because in the question answer sessions, there was an Argentinian friend and I was there, and someone talked about developmental theater. Rightfully so, that sustainable development theater, doing it in Nigeria, we are creating funding, we are going and engaging the community of Niger Delta River people, and we are creating. Everything is good, except someone questioned that in all of this, it's that white man's burden. That thing is the funding comes from that side, and you are thinking of this as a developmental form. Isn't there too much of a presumptuousness in there? And when that question happened, I could see in the Google screen expressions go, hey, don't do like this, don't be critical like this. And then I got emboldened and I questioned from, can the subaltern speak? And now an Argentine and Indian has questioned the whole group of white scholars. And somehow they're like, so should we stop doing this? So if you're critical from a global South lens, sometimes they think, then should we stop what we are doing here? And that's where you feel isolated again. So I get your point on isolation. The second point is, can circus be brought back into the public sphere? It's an economical question, it's a state sanction, because you see, the popular is continuously being usurped by the state. In Bengal as well, in other states, the cultural festivals are all, the government has its own HR ministry, it has its own Ministry of Culture. And I'm going to be critical and say that it aches me sometimes to see Cho dance used in IPL opening ceremony. it's the absolute point of isolation, because the point is not about the aesthetic of the Cho dance. It's a form which has its history, and there are other forms in the same region, same demography, which are getting underplayed because Cho has been chosen as the most spectacularly. So what seems exotic needs to be, and this is our state doing it. This is not even the white world doing it. So we have borrowed colonial idioms and we are using it in funding routes. And I have gone to various kind of academies, the folk academy that is there in Bagbazar, and once I wanted to work on Jatra, so I said I wanted to, so that person thought I want a space for Jatra, my own Jatra company will need a space. So when I told him I'm a researcher, he was most disappointed. You are a researcher, why have you come here? I have come here to look at your archives. He said, no, we have a yearly magazine which started from 2014. So before 2014, nothing exists. And that's an Paschim Bongo academy, right? And this is true of other states. So the point which I'm trying to get it, to bring it to the masses, it has to be done by the masses in some way. It has to be done from the circus communities in one way. I, as an academic, think that my next endeavor, and I'm thinking around this, would be to bring these people the way they are, not to experiment and not to dictate how I want them to perform, but to come and talk, let's say platformization, which was being talked about on the first day. And at best, try to see if there can be a form where they become the agents of what they speak and want. Sometimes they don't want it as well. So it's a very tricky question, but I think it has potentials, because you see, one of the very practical solutions is, in the West, you have these Biennales, Venice Biennale, Berlin Biennale. And in these Biennales, now Europe is full of festival economy. Everyone is doing festivals. Festival had its own economy. It was not gentrified economy. Now there are big funding routes around festivals being done. And they bring big circus performers to participate there. It generates a lot of economy. Something similar can happen here. We have Kochi Biennale, we have other organizations. So we need more committed scholars. Unfortunately, I'm a little lonely in my companions who are doing circus research. Very less people are doing circus research in India, because people are saying, what's the point of researching this? This is not a viable form. So it needs more research and more commitment, but I completely understand your question and I agree with that it needs, yeah.
Hello. Thank you so much. I really feel that it was a very relevant question indeed. So since we are running out of time, and if we do not have any more questions, we would like to...
There's one hand, but
okay,
I mean,
we have.
depending on.
Good afternoon, sir. I'm Koel Manna from St. Xavier's College. First of all, great presentation. I have a question. You spoke about gender norms and masculinity in circus. And I want to know, what is your opinion on dwarf men as performers? And how is it placed within the umbra of hegemonic masculinity?
Do we want to skip lunch? Then I can give this answer. No, thank you for that question. That's a very relevant, very big question. Probably we can have a discussion outside.
Absolutely,
I mean, maybe I'll not be able to do justice, possibly speaking. I don't want to take much time as well. Very briefly, there was a figure in Barnum and Bailey Circus. I don't have the image again, but the figure of what one would call the freak body. A body which is basically of, it's two bodies in one body, let's say. Half of that body is male, but kind of well formed with the face. The other half is female, but it doesn't have the female genitalia, but had other female anatomy. And it's a very interesting, and that person's known as Lalla, Lalu and Lalla. So Lalu and Lalla were two names, Lalu and Laila, two names given to the same person. And that became a very popular freak show. So this idea of the freak show of the abnormal bodies of dwarf men, as you are talking about. And even in contemporary circus, I don't think it is used in an emancipatory way. I mean, even if you look at the midgets used in contemporary circus, the kind of humor that is brought out is a kind of travesty of humanity first, and then the idea of masculinity is that, of course, they are not masculine enough, they are freak, they are shorter in height. So there's been some work done in the West again, because of funding, where in disability studies and in contexts of circus being social circus, that is circus which is used to create certain kinds of social awareness, there are performers who are dwarf men, there are performers who are disabled, that is using prosthetic legs, there are performers who are queer, who are constantly using the body to kind of narrate what we usually discourse about. That, you know, the idea of gender, the idea of this limit that we put on gender, the idea of what are the limits of gender, the discourse. And so what is discoursed about, they do that with a certain, and that's where I'm trying to say the repertoire of the embodied knowledge. They are not speaking, but they are letting their body talk. So a performance called by Erin Ball, who is one of these performer who has a prosthetic leg. And she starts the performance on the floor because without the leg, her height is much shorter. So she clearly uses that disabled body. But then she has a whole ritual of putting in the prosthetic leg and then climbing onto the high rope and doing the most strenuous acts that one can do by holding his partner, who is a male, with the hands. And I have talked to actual circus performers because there is a whole medical discourse in the 19th century in a different gender context that this trapeze act is not right for the woman to do. This was being said. Why? Because this popular idea was there that, you know, women are supposed to be hysterics. And in hysteria, anatomically, hysteria means the idea is that the womb is moving all over, the uterus is moving all over the body, right? That kind of pseudoscience, kind of discursive polemical idea. And in 19th century, there were a lot of medical documents which was professing against these kind of hanging, you know, the hanging trapeze artists and women figures as witchly, almost in the Sylvia Federici way. Like, they have alternate practices, and if they kind of indulge more in this, they will not be normative, and they will be hysteric women. So hysteric women are prone to this kind of acts. So you see, when I was talking to one of my friends, Morgan, who went to America's Got Talent, and she performed insane acts. I've seen it, holding a thread with the jaws and doing it requires immense strength. And she as a performer said, there is actually medically no evidence that the uterus is harmed by doing an upright act, right? So to come back to your question, what I think is, it's one thing in which bodies are inscribed in space. And in most cases, the dwarf men are inscribed in spaces with a certain definition. That you are on the stage, you are supposed to derive, the humor is supposed to come at your cost. But there are experimental shows where these dwarf men, women are agents of their own actions, where they become very central in choreographing their acts, where they will use the humor on themselves, rather than we being inscribing it on them. And in that, they arrest that agency. That yes, I'll also drive the humor, but I'll also laugh back at you. So there are acts which have, but unfortunately when I went to Ajanta Circus, it is the old kind of exploitative humor that comes out, yeah.
Thank you once again. We are really very sorry, and we would have taken up more questions and discussions if we had time. So with that,
and the apology is mine because I took up the initial time.
Not at all, it was very engaging. So with that, I suppose we end this session, and I request the coordinators to carry on from here.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Okay, with that extremely exhilarating, enticing, and insightful lecture, let's go to the next part of the session, the final plenary lecture of this popular culture conference. It is going to be delivered by Dr. Sneha Kaur Chaudhary, and it is titled The Contradictions of Populism and queer subjectivity in Indradeep Dasgupta's Grahe Pravesh, 2025 version. I request Professor Dr. Niladri R. Chatterjee to please chair this session. Okay. Yeah, before that, I would like to call upon Dr. Moni Kinkini Basu to please come and felicitate Dr. Chaudhary. Can we have a round of applause, please? Come on. Yes. A louder one, please. Yes. Ma'am, if you could just be seated for 2 minutes, I'll just give a brief introduction. So Dr. Snehakar Chaudhary is Head and Associate Professor of English in West Bengal State University. She is a member of the editorial board of the peer-reviewed journal New Victorian Studies, published by Swansea University. Her co-edited volume, Tagore's Ideas of the New Women, The Making and Unmaking of Female Subjectivity, has been published internationally by Sage and Sri Samye in 2017. Another co-edited volume, Refocus, the films of Shyam Benegal, was published in the Edinburgh University Press in 2023. Her most recent publication is a co-authored book entitled Centering Women in Bollywood Biopics, Empowerment and Agency in Contemporary Indian Cinema from Routledge in the year 2024. Her areas of specialization and research interest include Neo-Victorian studies, adaptation studies, gender studies, historical fiction, and historical cinema. She is a member of Feminist and Women's Studies Association UK, Center for Adaptation Studies UK, the American Comparative Literature Association, and the European Society for the Study of English. With that, we welcome ma'am again. Thank you.
Speaking now for half an hour speaking and 15 minutes for the interaction.
Whatever you are comfortable with.
I think the chair.
Yes, whatever you are comfortable.
Okay.
And you want to sit and do it if
No, this is okay. This is okay. Yeah.
Anything else you need?
I need a bottle of water.
I'll just give it. And you just give a prompt to him, that person, he'll just, change.
Okay, he'll change the slides. Right. Okay. Right. And one more question I have to my chair. Have you seen this film? Okay, I can hear, I can tell you.
I know about it. So I know the plot. I know what goes on. I've seen clips of it.
Okay.
But yeah, so.
Right. Just to start with, I would like to thank the conveners of the conference my students, Swarnendu Dam and Suropriyo Chakraborty, and then of course the head of the department, Dr. Moni Kinkini Basu, and the senior professors in the department, Professor Shubhidhar and Professor Probal Roy Chaudhuri, and the other people I know and have met in several other occasions. And it is definitely a great pleasure to be able to speak in a conference which concentrates particularly on popular culture. Right, I have been doing some popular culture studies on contemporary Bollywood cinema and post-feminist films, of which some publications have also come up. Not that I'm much of a queer studies scholar, but having seen this film, I felt very intrigued to talk about it, because I thought that when the director is trying to make this kind of a film in the Bengali context, especially Bengali, he's claiming to be a, he's actually, Indradip Das Gupta is a national award-winning music director and has worked with the major names in this industry. This is his first directorial venture. And when he's making this kind of a film, which I actually saw in the theaters, and I would say that it released in just in 13 June 2025, and later when I decided to talk about it, I had to go to a pirated edition of the film via telegram, and so the screenshots I have are a bit fuzzy at times. I'm sorry about that, because there is still no small screen release of the film, which will be maybe 6 months later in the OTTs and the television. But I thought it's a very strange kind of a narrative, and quite conservative, problematic, regressive, and that needs to be addressed. Because in Bengali already we have had an array of quite sensitive and very advanced films on queer characters and queer experiences. And the other most intriguing part is that the director claims that this film is a tribute to Rituparna Ghosh. And that is the most problematic part, which I hope I will be able to discuss. But then, of course, before starting, since there are so many students gathered, I will have to start with the traditional thing that is there in the concept note of the conference, that it mentions and talks about. It starts with the way in which Matthew Arnold had categorized high culture and low culture and created this binary, this division, and then it moves on to talk about the obvious, the Frankfurt School, and before that the Q.D. Lewis, F.R. Lewis, all their rejection, apparent rejection of popular culture, and then how the Birmingham School with scholars like Stuart Hall or Richard Hogarth, they were trying to say that how popular culture can be a strong means of resistance, offering alternative narratives of certain kinds of change that can come from below. So I will not much harp on that, but rather go to my first slide. Go to my first slide, where we see that now when I am talking about a Bengali film, of course the shift is from the typical Western paradigms of popular culture to that of what is there in India. And therefore, to start with, and then maybe in our province as such, to start with, I've used very small quotations so that the theoretical part is not so so much there. I would rather like to talk about the film. So we all know that South Asian public and popular culture is hybrid, and it's in between. And taking the Bhavalian paradigm, we see that even Appadurai and Breckenridge, they say that South Asian popular culture exists between the tensions and contradictions between national sites and transnational cultural processes. So whatever happens across the globe comes across here, and how that is mutated and how that is transformed, and how that becomes a part of our own culture is very important. And therefore, if we jump from there to queer Asian studies, in that sense that queer studies is so popular all over the world, but then again, it is not always about how the Western queer world operates, because you have to think in terms of race, gender, and positionality, and the way the Western society operates, and as opposed to that, Asian queer studies, where of course you have to take into account the way in which the homosexuals are perceived in India in terms of law, culture, religion, and other related factors. So, two very important works that I consulted was one of both actually by J. Daniel Luther, who has been working extensively on queer Asian studies and Indian queer cultures, who points out that it is important for queer studies in Asia to combine itself with Asian studies and to bring together researchers who would talk about queerness in the Asian context, which is very specific. And he emphasizes on various kinds of popular cultures which are important, and especially the social media or popular forms of entertainment, which are important in conceptualization of queer sexualities. And then, of course, there's another book which he writes recently, where he says, in Queering Normativity and South Asian Public Culture, Wrong Readings Only, where he says that what is normal is something quite predetermined by, again, the saffron politics that exists around, and all kinds of things that happen in India. So we really don't know what is right or what is wrong, because the official culture has a certain projection of sexuality, and then there are practices, and then there are backlashes. But then again, of course, the turning point would be definitely the decriminalization of homosexuality by the Supreme Court judgment, and how that had produced in 2018 onwards, from 2018 onwards, a certain kind of cultural consciousness, and that percolated into various popular films which were made during that time, after that time, and especially in Hindi, of which I'm not going to talk much. But then I remember having given a lecture at the University of Brighton Lesbian Network in 2015, where it was a lesbian studies conference, and I spoke on Abhishek Chaube's Derishkia. And Derishkia, again, is one of those films which does not foreground much of this lesbian relation that the two major women might have in the film, between Madhuri and Huma Qureshi, Begum and the servant. But again, that again is one of those films which talk about quote-unquote Sakhyani, and that tradition of Sakhyani. And when I went for that conference, one of the most intriguing things that I observed of the track, before I gave my paper actually, that you don't look queer, you are not a practicing homosexual, so why have you come to a conference of people who are lesbians, practicing lesbians? So that was something very intriguing and embarrassing for me. I just said that, look, I am interested in working on gender studies, and I'm exploring new gender studies. So of course I have tried my bit. And when I gave the paper, after all, I was quite lucky that it was well received, and they were very intrigued and really very happy to know that at least in India these kind of films are being made, and that too with stars like Madhuri Dixit, which everyone knew, and they thought that a very well-known, very mainstream artist had actually chosen to play such a character who had a problematic sexuality. and they could not. I still remember that most of them are British, and some of them are from other parts of the world, from South America and so on. They were like quite happy with the way in which I could express my thoughts on how Indian queer films are progressing. That is what I still remember. But then at that point of time, I did not get time to talk much about the Bengali films that were made. Now, with that kind of an ethos, if we look at Bengali queer films, we see that from 2003 onwards, such films have been done in a steady way by, and especially the contribution of Rituparna Ghosh, who though Nil Nirjane is the first film which is about a lesbian relationship, then of course Rituparna Ghosh's Arekti Premer Golpo and Memories in March and Chitrangada. All these very iconic films where he is talking about gender identity disorder and all kinds of very intriguing experiences of sexual descent, we definitely see that again, when Shomantoral and Nagar Kirtan, they released in 2017 and 2019, there was already this wind of change via the Supreme Court verdict, but still we know that Nagar Kirtan did not have a public release for a long time, and there was a lot of controversy about it. So, this is largely the number of films which are made, and there are some lesser known films like Ochena Bondhuttor Family Album, which are not by very major directors, but as we know that after Rituparna Ghosh made his films, of course, Nagar Kirtan is again a tribute to that subgenre. Right, and it's almost very awkward that the man who made Nagar Kirtan plays a very strange character in this film, Griho Pravesh, which now I'm going to talk about. Right, you go to the fourth slide. You change your slide? The next one. I've talked about this, the next one. Yes, so what I have tried to do, I'm technologically quite challenged and not so equipped like you, but still I have tried to put a collage so that you can get a idea of the screenshots that I took from the pirated edition. So I'm sorry about that, but at least that helps me to discuss the film. Right, and these are shots of the major sequences which I will like to discuss. Now, like most of these narratives on alternative sexualities, and most disappointingly, when I started watching the film, the impression I got that it's a kind of a heterosexual love story. And since Shubhashree Ganguly, who after working on projects like the web series Indobala Bhater Hotel and films like Porinita, she had discovered herself as an actress. So mainly Indradeep Dasgupta was projecting her at the center stage. And that itself is not very desirable, because if you are trying to make a film about a gay relationship, then, and when you foreground a woman's story who is named Tithli after one of the very important and favorite characters of Rituparna Ghosh, then you are from the very beginning trying to shift the focus of attention from the man-man romantic relationship to a kind of a woman's romantic awakenings, and that too to draw all the sympathy in her favor. So that is the most disturbing part in the film. And we see that these are the scenes which I would briefly refer to. The film is Griho Pravesh, which would mean that what enters the house in a way. And it is double-ended, because it means that homosexuality enters a very conservative traditional setup of the North Kolkata mansion, because the son is a homosexual, which is revealed in the end. And before that is also that this lover who comes, this man, his name is Dr. Meghdut Bose, played by Jitu Kamal, who is of Aparajito fame, we know. And he comes in this mansion as a boarder because Shubhasri, who is married in this family, Titli, she wants to run a kind of a homestay because it's a huge colonial mansion, and therefore to rent some of the rooms. And the way he comes, there's a storm brewing there, and then we see that the moment he comes in, Shubhasri, who is married, but the husband has disappeared under mysterious circumstances, shown, and Titli is enamored of this young man who is a stranger and just a boarder maybe, but maybe there are other secrets that he is hiding. And there's this kite flying scene, and we see that she, who had become very colorless and disappointed after the disappearance of the husband, who had actually gone to, immediately after the marriage, had decided to go for war front photography and is not in touch with the wife at all. And that kind of a darkness which had come upon her is somewhat changed because she is able to participate in a kind of a heterosexual friendship that she strikes with this man who has come. And then there are these moments, again, what is good about the film are the visuals and the aesthetics, which is based and inspired from the films of Rituparna Ghosh, because it's a visually rich film, and you can see that it brings back, and there are the Durga Puja scenes. You go to the next slide. There are these Durga Puja scenes, and which are typical of the opulent narratives of Rituparna Ghosh in films like, say, if you think of Utshav and of course Antarmahal, and many of these other narratives where he's foregrounding these images of Bengal. But then again, what strikes us is that heteronormatic plot does not work out in that sense, because this other man, and here I have tried to bring the screenshots of the marriage night and the way the husband, Shaun, he rejects the romantic advances of Titli, and Titli had a conservative upbringing, and she's an orphan, and it was an arranged marriage. So with a stranger, she doesn't know that why this happens, unless we see that one very brief shot where Shaun and then finally Meghdut, who is actually then the lover of Shaun, who had come with the news that he had died in the war and he had brought the ashes. So that is that discovery which comes very much at the end, showing that there is a supplanting of the straight romantic narrative with this kind of a queer narrative. But then again, what we see is that when Meghdut learns that Titli is the wife of Shaun, he feels betrayed himself, because he did not know that Shaun was married. And then we see that the scene where the eyes of Durga are being drawn, which means this is a moment of epiphany for Meghdut, and he realizes that this is a moment of bitter truth. And then therefore there's this confusion. The next slide. But then again, what we see is that Titli is unable to decode this kind of an inner dynamics, and she's still hoping that maybe the relation with the husband has not worked and it will work with this man. And she proceeds with the encouragement of her friend, who prompts her that now that you have another chance, so you try and propose to this man. But then of course in that very important scene where the proposal is made, we find that Shaun is dead, and she finds that this man knows Shaun, and he says that you have come to this city as a stranger and you have been telling me things which are identical to what my husband did. Then how do you know him? And he says that, yes, I knew him because I was his lover, and we are actually in the same boat. And then of course Titli's reaction is volatile, because she says that now that we are shotin, because we are step wives to each other. So how problematic, co-wives, step-wives, that's a word she uses. And then there's a breakout and a fallout. And the moment this happens in the film, the entire sympathy and the support of the audience would go to this woman. Because the entire thing is that in the film, Jitu Kamal as Meghdut constantly has to say that we homosexuals, I'm sorry, we are not criminals. Then why is he making such a apologetic statement? Is also because, please go to the next slide, is also because this one is blurred, I'm sorry, I'll explain that. It's a very conservative North Kolkata family where it is impossible for Aprotim, the character played by Kaushik Ganguly, who is a spice merchant, and his wife Srimati, played by Shoini Haldar, who would not be able to accept or digest this kind of a narrative of the son's homosexuality. And significantly, it is shown that Aprotim is very fond of the films of Rituparna Ghosh, and his son, and there are scenes where he and his son, they're watching his films again and again. Now you watch Dahon and you watch the earlier films. But the moment Shaun says that let us watch Chitrangada, let us watch the later films. And then he says that no, these are the films that these are not wrong films. These are the films where he was not doing the proper thing. So I don't want to watch the queer films of Rituparna. So in an essence, a Bania is completely denying the sexual orientation and the progressive vision of sexuality that Rituparna Ghosh had, and he brought in his films. So as a fan, I would say Aprotim is a kind of a persona of Indradip Dasgupta, who the director himself, who rejects that other, the better, the more revolutionary side of Rituparna Ghosh, and which is the quintessential Rituparna Ghosh. It is not just about his directorial skills or his ability of storytelling, but the kind of radical sexual values that he promoted. That stays with us, right? But then this film is a complete denial of that. Instead, therefore, I would say that it's a kind of a superficial tribute, because if you look at the one which is blurred, let me explain. It's a scene where Shubhasree is seen getting immersed in a bathtub, which is like the immersion of the Durga idol. It is as if she is the Durga who has been betrayed, and then she is almost dying, and she is feeling so bad about the situation that the two homosexual men, they have betrayed her, and they have not even told her the truth before. And of course, she's also, why I have chosen to highlight on the last scene is that this is a scene where there is this Trishul which the family had, and it was given to the son. And then this Trishul, the mother was asking for it, that it has to be given to the wife, because she is the Durga, she is the one who will come to our family as Gauri, as Lokhi. And then the son, when he dies, he returns this, and he gives it to the mother. This is the scene where that Trishul is being, that gold Trishul. But then again, this idea that the scene where we see that Titli is the typical good housewife who is feeding all the people around, cooking, and then she's the Durga who is getting immersed, and then she's the Durga who is supposed to hold the Trishul. That entirely embodies women power and tries to show that when women have so many problems and precarities and vulnerabilities, then why at all talk about homosexual men and their romances? So the next slide. So again, what we see is that since she's been projected as the Durga of the household, she remains in that house as a caregiver to the ailing parents who have suffered this kind of a loss. And then she's so lonely, and then Meghdut, who is unable to leave the city, but is also unable to have any kind of romantic relationship with her. So she is a deserted and extremely ditched and betrayed character, who's a vulnerable middle-class orphan woman. And since Shaun, the husband, did not try to open up before her and did not confess and just escaped, and again, the other lover also does not want to be a bisexual person. And therefore, this woman is completely at the receiving end of homosexuality. And then, of course, I have only 2-3 minutes, so it's not a problem. So the ending itself is again very awkward, in the sense that there is another lover who's there before she got married, and that is just a few shots by Abid Chatterjee, who comes back in the end. And Titli is so delighted that she faints almost, that now I have finally got this heterosexual lover. Now my original man is back, and I can go beyond the memories of this kind of a menage a trois that I had gone through in this marriage with one homosexual man, and the love story that she was imagining with that other homosexual man. And also the sheer rigidity that, again, we know that some of the homosexuals, men and women, are of course practicing bisexuals, but they are here that they are so indifferent and insensitive to a woman's desires and her vulnerability, that she's an orphan and that she has nowhere to go. She was raised by her maternal uncles, and that she had been deceived, and she would always say that I was born in Robi Bar, which my mother said is a Nishphala bar, and I was born during the Durga Puja, which means I will always be at the sacrificed, and I'll be deserted, and all the men in my life, they vanish. So the last scene is not where the men vanish, but a man who is apparently, hopefully not an homosexual. If he tries to make a sequel, I don't know. There were major backlashes to this, and of course Professor Kaustubh Bakshi has written very perceptive reviews about it, and he spoke against it. And obviously, even if we are not practicing homosexuals, many of us, but then we would not like to see homosexuals being represented like this. And then the characters always apologizing, always trying to say that they have done something wrong, they have hurt this woman, and they've hurt their parents. This kind of filmmaking is, this film did quite well, and they also had this celebration party, and Shubhasri's character was majorly praised. And that is why I use the term populism, that like give the people what they actually want to see, that women, they are more important. Then why look at even homosexual men? They are like, they should not exist. Look at these women who are falling prey to now not only abusive men but also homosexual men. So that itself made the film quite successful. The box office went well, and I'm sure that there are a lot of these people who have gone to see it, who were the part of the ordinary, popular, lay audience. They have enjoyed and supported Shubhasri. Wow, what a wonderful performance she's giving. She's so consistent with her character, and then even after her marriage and all, she's doing so well. All these kind of things which are normative, and she's ticking all the boxes. And then, of course, in other words, Indrajit Dasgupta has done something very disturbing, unnecessary, and I cannot imagine a director trying to, and especially somebody who's not making a mainstream kind of a film, but a alternative film, a serious film. The music is of course good, because he is himself a good music director, and that adds to the visuals of the film, which are a tribute to Rituparna Ghosh, as I said. And the way he says "Bhalo theko Rituda" is as if Shaun has died and Rituparna Ghosh has also died. So let's put off all the homosexual problematic characters and say, okay, bhalo theko, amra heterosexual hoye bhalo achi. That's the way it ends. Okay, thank you. Okay.
So yes, okay. I wasn't going to watch the film because I thought it was absolutely unspeakably bad, but now I will, because what you have done is turned a horrible film into a brilliant comedy, for which many thanks. I didn't realize that it had so much comic potential, but thanks to your presentation, I think I'll go there just for the comedy. Thank you so much really for focusing on on a very peculiar kind of phenomenon, Sneha, that you know, a lot of the queer community has been noticing, and this is very much a part of the whole neoliberal economy, in the sense that, you know, look how understanding we are. You know, there's this astonishing category called being an ally. So you know, আমি কিন্তু ওদের মতো না, কিন্তু আমি ওদের support করি. And the astonishing patronization, you know, that is available there. And I absolutely, I mean, I think that the director was trying to be an ally, but he decided that he doesn't like homosexuals that much. So it's like, na, আমি ally হতে চাই, কিন্তু ওরা খুব ভালো লোক নয়. So then you say, না ভাই, আমি heterosexual হয়ে ভালোই আছি. So therefore so obviously there will be lots of questions from the audience. But so, you know, you talked about Rituparna Ghosh, and definitely Arekti Premer Golpo was, I mean, people usually think that it is by Rituparna Ghosh, but of course it's by Kaushik Ganguly.
Yes, it's right.
And no, but I think it's a very interesting mistake to make, and it's an interesting mistake to make because I remember when I was talking to Chopal Bhaduri about the film, and I said, Chopalda, I've got a question for you, and you have to answer this very truthfully. Who directed Arekti Premer Golpo? Was it Kaushik Ganguly or was it Rituparna Ghosh? And it was a very awkward silence because he sort of took a gulp of water and he said, na na eshob ki proshno, na eta to Kaushik ki koreche. I said, bolun na amake, bolun, kichu hobe na. And then once he was suitably comfortable, I'm good at making people feel comfortable before I can exploit them. So then I said, apni bolun, apnar kichu hobe na, mane apni hoyto khun hoye jete paren, kintu tachhara kichu hobe na. So then he said that, you know, Niladri, when Kaushik came to me, he was really intending to do a film just on me. And then Ritu came into the scene, and he effectively hijacked it. Obviously. And he sort of inserted himself into the character, into the story, and said, you know, I want to do this. So I think Chopalda harbors a little bit of a resentment against Rituparna Ghosh, because you see, the thing that we have to understand about Rituparna Ghosh is that, much like the most of us, he was walking a very interesting tightrope between being hegemonic and being marginalized. Because Rituparna Ghosh himself could be fantastically hegemonic. And he could be very rude, and you know, his volatility of temperament, which was happening due to his, you know, drugs that he was taking for his gender transitioning. So my query to you would be that, you know, if you look at the kind of films that have been, I mean, there have been really, really horrible ones like Shamantaral, which I thought was horrible. But then there were some really good ones like Nagar Kirtan. Where do you think Tollywood stands now regarding queer representation? And do you see any possibility at all of there being a kind of film like, you know, Bombay has given us Aligarh, you know, which I think is probably the best sort of Indian queer film ever. What is it that Aligarh is able to do that Bengal, supposedly such an amazing beacon of you know, progressive cinema, is unable to do? What do you think is going wrong?
Definitely, it's a very, very important and pertinent question. I think the quality of films being made here, if you think of films like Family Album or Nil Need Jone, they are more commercial and sexually oriented. It's more of that, as if the directors, most of them, except for the maker of Nagar Kirtan, or the Nagar Kirtan as a film itself, they are, and of course Chitrangada and Memories in March, we see that there is a lot of curiosity about the queer people, whether they are lesbians or gays, and the films are catering to that kind of curiosity, and they are more erotic in that sense that it is exotic because it's queer sexuality on screen. And there is no sincere attempt as such consistently after Rituparna Ghosh or even Kaushik Ganguly too. And imagine Kaushik Ganguly agreeing to play Aprotim. That itself was very shocking to me, right? And he played it quite well. It is obviously a character that he brings to life quite well, and that typical North Kolkata spice merchant who is a banya and is steeped in rituals and all kinds of conservatism. But I don't know, but after making of Griho Pravesh and after the success of Griho Pravesh, there might be these kind of films which problematize and contradict the whole discourse and have more complicated narratives which would create more binaries and more kinds of illicit and illegitimate stories of homosexuality. I can only imagine it going in this direction more. Now, if you think of these very playful and unnecessary and irrelevant insertions of homosexuality in the films of Srijit Mukherjee, like in the ending of when they Dasham Avatar, the earlier one, Ditya Purush, right? It's completely unnecessary and superfluous. These kind of things are more likely to happen now. And had Rituparna Ghosh been alive, he might have been able to cast and influence and control this kind of productivity. But now that he's not there, I don't think Kaushik Ganguly will take a stance. Then he wouldn't have agreed to do this film. Anybody could have done that character.
Also, just one, but this is for those who are not aware, that before Arekti Premer Golpo, there was a television version of that same story called Ushno Tar Jonno.
Yes, yes.
And it's very sad that is not available anywhere.
Very little data is available.
I think it would be a very interesting exercise to do a kind of a comparative study between Ushno Tar Jonno and Arekti Premer Golpo, how that narrative is transformed. And I think, and Chapal Bhaduri, of course, plays a role there as well as here, so I think it's fantastic. So thank you really for a very, very intriguing paper about an unintentionally funny film.
Unintentionally funny, yes.
Thank you, ma'am, for that presentation. I mean, this is picked up more as generic thinking through what Niladrida was saying. And I mean, I'm trying to understand to what extent these glossing overs that happen has to do with the intersection of the idea of class. I mean, the problematization of the idea of class within queer.
Yes.
And I mean, a movie which comes to my mind in a mainstream, in a different context, is obviously in Konkona's rendition in The Last Stories, where, you know, the ending got, I mean, it's a split, Gilipuchi, right? So it's a I think it's called The Mirror. Gilipuchi. So I mean, when that moment comes, there's a sense of contradiction that, is this the kind of resolution we are looking at? Because, and I think I credit Konkona because she brings that debate in a more naturalistic way. Instead of creating a debate like we do in discourse, she does it more naturally. So I'm thinking, what would be your response to the over of, you know, Bengali cinema making, where even within queer directors and queer writers, the problem of class is not, and I don't mean class merely economically here, because the idea of intellectual Bengali. I have class because I have certain kind of cultural capital. So how does that sit into this framework?
Yes, it does, definitely. And that typical middle class ethos and the idea that it is so upper middle class, well-to-do, everything is fine with them, and then suddenly is this problem of a homosexual man, like in Shomantoral, that bat diye petano holo cheleke, keno shari porte cheyeche. এই যে সিনটা where Soumitra is confessing all the time, and then this character is hidden, is misunderstood. এই জায়গাটা তো মানে is there in every other film that we see. Even in Nagar Kirtan, maybe in a little fluid way, because in Nagar Kirtan the characters are a little bohemian and have a sense of fluidity, and they move around, and they are not so class privileged and typical. maybe Madhu is more mobile, and the character of Riddhi Sen, নামটা মনে পড়ছে না এখন, কি যেন, হ্যাঁ, that has a resonance with the এখন মনে পড়ছে না। So those were two characters who are more precarious in terms of their class position. So they have been given a space where they can create their own queer world and they try to survive, but then again we see that in the end Riddhi Sen is committing suicide. So the basic logic that all the queer characters have to die, either have to be removed or they have to be sort of thrown out of the frame. And that it keeps happening all the time. But in this film, interestingly, we will have no sympathy for Shaun. We will feel all the sympathy for Titli, because Titli is like betrayed completely by this husband, does not participate in the nuptial night rituals, and why is he hiding this, and why the parents are feeling so bad about it because they are so conservative. So I don't know whether I'm answering your question, but I'm trying to. That definitely when it comes to, and in this film the class is very much foregrounded. That this is this family which is typical, traditional, rich. They have money coming from business, so they can host a grand Durga Puja, and they can maintain a big mansion. But then at the heart of it, there is so much of contradiction and so much of duplicity and hypocrisy about sexual standards. That goes on. That can go on, even if there is money. The progress stops there.
That's kind of true, because I was just, as you were saying, in the Malayali film industry, I mean, there were some independent filmmakers in British films. I mean, they completely do it very differently. I mean, there are films which kind of get into this more intersectional queer dynamic. And somewhere the
Bengali directors, like, maybe they're eyeing the box office. They want to be popular that way. Right. They want to, like, belong. Yes.
Hello.
Yes,
Audrey. Yeah. Thank you, ma'am. Always nice listening to you. I just had an observation and a question. I was wondering, you were talking about populism. This women being quote unquote trapped within a marriage with a homosexual, this theme has been dealt with before.
Yes.
For example, the one movie I can remember by Shotorupa Sannal, probably it was in 2015 or 16, Onno Appala, which was hardly even watched. Or a play directed by Soumitra Chatterjee back in 2017, I had watched it in Indian Museum on Bostomi. The theme was worked on. What I found problematic with this film was the way it was promoted. The director or the producer tried to draw the gaze or the attention of the audience towards come and watch a movie about a topic that is exoticized. That is kind of the watchword. And then when you project something on screen, you do a safe play so that it caters to all mindsets and does a good business. So this kind of safe play, which contradicts the entire promotional and the trailer of the film, is of course a part of the populism. But what is your opinion? Does that also not question or undermine the position of the Bengali audience?
Yes, it definitely does. And it compromises with their visions of progress, and apparently Bengalis thinking ahead. And when it comes to homosexuality, they can't think ahead. And also in the after 2018, that too after that. And also, as he's saying, that there have been these niche narratives which by Shotorupa Sannal or plays or films which have not got a major audience. Maybe it has done some rounds at the festivals and then they have vanished and disappeared. And this women-centric films, that since there's a plethora of them in Bengali, and all the heterosexual men doing all the wrong things to them, now you see this is so exotic that even homosexual men are doing this to women. So how dangerous women are, dangerously placed in the Bengali community. So to intensify the problems from every side. So why think of other sexualities when women themselves are so vulnerable in Bengali? This is one of the predominant messages of the film. And that would sell because now post-feminist cinema is more popular than maybe queer cinema. So the box office would be more successful. And then to watch Shubhasri Ganguly, and then to watch her with Dev, and then to have project her as a major star, who after her marriage she could retain her stardom. It's a big thing. Because in popular culture, the married women are mothers, and they are not supposed to have so much of space in terms of their presence. But then she has this well-connected husband who is promoting her career. So that is also one of the strategies. Shubhasri wouldn't have agreed to do the film. It could have been done by a much ordinary actress who's less known, maybe much more talented. But then Indradip wanted a kind of a publicity, which makes it more popular and visible and acceptable. Right. I don't think Shubhasri could have subscribed to a character which would be marginal and which would not give her the scope that she now is wanting from the industry.
Yeah, I think one director's name that absolutely has to be name checked is Anjan Dotto. Because I think in film after film after film, he makes it a point to have a queer subplot.
Yes,
and that
yes,
I think is something which very often goes missing. And I think Anjan Dotto is somebody that I would much, I'd be happier to perhaps claim Anjan Dotto as an ally, rather than somebody like him. So I think in discussions about Bengali queer cinema, people need to talk a little bit more about Anjan Dotto.
Yes, thank you for reminding. Yes, obviously, finally, Bhalobasha, and many of these other films. Definitely. And that too also quite well represented, adequately
very
represented.
sensitively done. I've never had any problems with him at all.
Yes. Thank you for that. Thank you for that.
I think even Anjan Dotto has represented asexuality, which is absolutely rare.
Yes,
I
very,
have
very
never
rare.
seen that
Right.
representation. Only Anjan Dotto was the one.
Yeah. Thank you. That's a new avenue. Maybe I'll explore that later. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sneha Kaur Chaudhary, for such an engaging lecture. Without further ado, we are going to move on to the academic session, which is the fourth academic session of this conference, and the first one for today.
So we are announcing the venues, the name of the session, and the paper presenters. Though you already know that, please take a note of it. And there are volunteers who would guide you to your respective venues.
Academic session 4A, which is in the ground floor, SNU boardroom. The name of the paper presenters are Ananya Ghosh, সৌম্যদীপ সরকার, আলেখ্য মণ্ডল, Shemanti Chattopadhyay and Paulomi Chatterjee, and Tanushree Boshak. Please note, the academic session 4B, we have to change the venue. The new venue is 204 instead of Vice Chancellor's conference room. Session 4B will be held in room number 204. Please note, session 4B will be held in room number 204. The name of the paper presenters are Otonu Kumar Rai, Triyasha Ghoshal, Debolina Dash, Dipro Mondol, and Anindita Chakraborty. Academic session 4C will be held in room number, it's in placement cell boardroom, which is in second floor. Session 4C, The venue is Placement Cell Boardroom, which is in the second floor. The name of the paper presenters are Oritrik Datta Chaudhuri, Orpon Mitro, Dipannita Nath, Afrin Khatun, Ritoja Rai. Academic session 4D. The venue is Moot Court, third floor. The name of the paper presenters are Atif Abdullah, Jhilam Odhikari, Suparna Rai, and Shongita Chakraborty.
The next set of session, that is 4E, is to be held in room number A603. The paper presenters are Ayush D. Bappa, Akash Biswas, Siddharth Bose, Oishi Banerjee, and Ishita Banerjee. Aishwarya Mukhopadhyay. Session 4F will be held in room number A608. The paper presenters are Aditya Mukherjee, Madhurita Mahato, Shrishti Sharma, Shweta Bhattacharya, Srijita Talukdar. Session 4G to be held in room number A612. And name of paper presenters are Jess Pandey, Snigdha Jana, Pragya Chakrabarti, Geeti Mehti, Kajal Jana, and Rimi Datta. That's a joint paper. Next is session 4H to be held in room number A613. Paper presenters' names are Yasmin Khan, Priyasi Haldar and Shalini Chakrabarti, Arimitra Debroy, Dipanita Sarkar, and Tamaldeep Roy. Please note that once you finish with your sessions, please come back here for the working lunch. That would be served around 2, once you finish with your sessions.
And note that after the lunch, we are going to assemble here for the book launch. So you guys can make a move to the moot court or placement cell or so after the lunch, we are going to meet here in the seminar hall for the book launch event. Thank you very much.